Good evening and welcome to the June 4th, 2018 regular meeting of the Mayor and City Council. First item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. I would like to invite Brady Rowe, a second grader from Gaithersburg Elementary, to the podium to lead us in the pledge. If everyone can please rise. Hello, Brady. Go ahead.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great job. Great job, Brady. Thank you so much. Next item on our agenda is reflection. As I call for a moment of silence, I want to call everyone's attention to the beloved memory of Sigrid McCutcheon, who was a very, very active resident for a lot of years in the city of Gaithersburg, lived in the Kentlands neighborhood, and I think moved to the Lakelands at some point, was involved in a number of city committees, and very active and made the community a brighter, more special place. And so may her memory be for a blessing, and we shall have a moment of silence. Thank you very much. Next, we have presentations, and I would like to invite Nick Griffith from Rachel Carson Elementary to join me at the podium. Thank you. You're good. Hey, Nick. How are you? Good. All right. Thank you for being here. So, fourth graders in the city of Gaithersburg were encouraged to share their concepts for leadership and collaboration in a statewide essay contest sponsored by the Maryland Municipal League and in partnership with the Maryland Mayors Association and the Chesapeake Employers Insurance Company. This year, 125 essays from the city of Gaithersburg, from Gaithersburg schools, I should say, were submitted to the statewide contest addressing the theme Live to Lead. Maryland Municipal League selected one winner and 4 semifinalists from each of its 11 regional districts. City resident Nick Griffith was chosen as the winner from District 5, and this was quite a feat considering the level of competition with more than 3,100 essays submitted statewide. So it's a great pleasure for me to introduce Nick Griffith from Miss Susan, is it Gent or Gent? Gent. Miss Susan Gent's 4th grade class at Rachel Carson Elementary School, and we would like to invite Nick to read his award-winning essay right here. Do we have a little?
Yes.
I got something for you to stand on right here.
If I were mayor, I would try to help with school bullying. We know that school bullying has been around for a very long period of time, but I feel as though it is getting very worse than before. At my school, cool kids get all the attention, but if you're like me, you can be mocked by these children. The insults affect these children's futures as it can lead to depression and even thoughts of suicide. This is not good for these children, for they could have had great futures while these kids just mess it up and cause them to have a very unhappy life due to these cool kids bullying. This comes back on them through a concept called karma. Karma means if you do something bad in your past, it will reflect on your future and make it so you experience what the victims of your insults have felt. To prevent this from happening, teachers every day should gather the class around to talk about bullying. The teacher could ask all the children if anyone is being bullied. This will then encourage the kids to not bully others, because if they do, they would be called out. The school can let the community know about these changes by writing an article in the newspaper. On the other hand, a live broadcast at the news station could tell how schools are making changes in their ways of prevention of bullying or problems that schools are having with bullying. School bullying is a concept that children should be able to understand, not to inflict on anyone.
Well done. So we have a certificate of congratulations from the mayor and city council to Nick Griffith, Rachel Carson Elementary, Susan Gent, grade 4 teacher, for becoming Maryland Municipal League District 5 winner of the statewide If I Were Mayor essay contest, presented this 4th day of June 2018 and signed by me. Congratulations. Next, we have let me just get to the right spot. We have our presentation from the One Main Street Initiative, and we're going to let John Schlichting, our Director of Planning and Code Administration, introduce the topic.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. The One Main Street Initiative was formed by the Kentlands Community Foundation and funded by the Kentlands Citizens Assembly Title Holder Contribution Fund to come up with strategies to revitalize Main Street and enhance downtown Kentlands. I have been serving as a member of this committee, and tonight I'm pleased to introduce committee members Marianne Zylstra and Neil Burka, and consultant Rich Bradley of the Urban Partnership to present the results of our 5-month mandate. Marianne.
Welcome.
Thanks, John, and thanks to everyone here for giving us the time to present the One Main Street Initiative. A little more background, I'm a Kentlands resident, and Neil is the chair of our committee, and he's a Lakelands resident. He also works for Federal Realty and manages Pike and Rose and Bethesda Row, so he's brought a lot of expertise to our committee. And Rich has been the executive director of the Downtown DC Business Improvement District for about 20 years, and now he serves as an advisor to business improvement districts around the DMV. So we have a lot of skill sets up here. As John mentioned, the KCA board last fall, on behalf of the residents, decided to make an investment in the future of Main Street, and by extension, the future of what we are calling tonight downtown Kentlands. The funds were used, well, as John mentioned also, the mandate was to develop a strategic roadmap to solve the challenges of Main Street, and the funds were used to retain outside expertise such as Rich and also a consulting firm called Live, Work, Learn, Play to help us accomplish our mandate. Tonight we're going to present some key elements of the roadmap which will guide us to our objectives, and also will show that there will be great benefits not just to the residents, the business owners, and the property owners in our immediate area, but to the entire city of Gaithersburg. So we have probably a 30-minute slide deck that we're going to cram into 15, so apologies in advance if I skip through a lot of these slides, which I am. I will read this, though, because I think the opportunity is important. A collaborative joint effort between key stakeholders and asset owners to develop a shared vision and development strategy to ensure Main Street and downtown Kentlands continue to be essential economic drivers for Gaithersburg's economy. This is just a little background research. I'm going to skip it, but we have a point to make on this slide.
Yes, thank you very much for the chance to visit with you. The point that I think we'd like to make here is if you look at the competition for Main Street and for the Kentland Center, is essentially it competes against other managed centers, which you have often are single owners who can come together and can control the kind of mix of uses that you have. At the present time, it's a disadvantage to have 66 owners and then 2 other large owners, and so that's number one. The second thing I'd like to make is in looking at the amount of retail that could be developed here, over the next few years, it's probably something in the neighborhood of about 30 to 40,000 square feet. Retail is not unfolding in dramatic ways across the country. So there are other uses we're going to have to look at the same time come up with a strategy that makes sense.
So I'm going to skip over this, but just one point to make here. Everybody knows retail is changing. Everyone's online shopping. But the future of retail is the experience, and our small footprints on Main Street fit very well into that future.
So there's a variety of sort of issues that confront making the Main Street and Kentlands work better. The ownership structures, it's complex, as you know, certainly on Main Street. There's some very significant physical design and marketing positioning. There's the issues of the asset management, and certainly the funding and financing of the kind of future to make it more competitive. And lastly, there's, in general, as we'll talk about later, the need for public support. So let me just move on, go to the next one if I can. So what's the opportunity? The opportunity in many respects is to move forward organizationally, but to really look very much at the entire area as an evolving mixed-use center. And as you can see here, there are really like 4 different areas. We've included Metamune in here because of its impact, but you have the Kentlands, I'm sorry, what's that? I can't read that. Anyway, there's the Salt properties,
Kentlands.
the Kimco's property, and Main
Square.
Street. These are the various areas here. And the idea is to think of them as independent but unified in a single market position.
So we'll skip through that, but this shows a little bit of the physical enhancement.
Yeah, so the idea here is to think in two regards. The first, in the right-hand corner, you can sort of see the outline of the way in which the Kentlands could be more effectively organized in a kind of a walkable environment. The city of Gaithersburg set off about 30 or 40 years ago to really look at, you might call an experiment, but I think it's had a remarkable success. The opportunity is now to complete that. And you have the opportunity as this area unfolds to make these connections. But secondly, on the left-hand corner, there's a need to really take what now is the Main Street and interconnect it with this larger area. So there's some very significant improvements. The key infrastructure is actually going to be Kentlands Boulevard, which requires a lot of attention, but it should become the spine around which a walkable center evolves. So what you can see here, among other things, is we're looking at the kind of market mix that you would have here. It's much more of a maker mix as far as Main Street goes. It'd be very difficult to get the kind of tenants you have in the bigger shopping areas, but you can make this a very exciting destination by looking at artisanal kinds of things, more personal type services. There is a market opportunity different than what you'd find in a larger shopping center.
As far as activation goes, we don't need another Oktoberfest. That's huge. The 5K is huge, but smaller events to draw traffic to Main Street. And I think maybe the ask to the city is just to keep an open mind when we request permitting for some unique events in our public spaces. You wanna talk about it?
So there's an opportunity here, it said simultaneously, to invest in Main Street. You can see some of the images of the kinds of things that could make Main Street more attractive. Talked a little bit about the kinds of investments needed for the Kentland Center. What we'd like to sort of focus your attention on is the way to move forward. But you find around the country, and certainly it needed here, is an organization that has been used and tried called Main Streets. I think there are quite a few in Maryland. I think there are 1,000 around the United States. In the district, we actually have 20 Main Street programs that are in the neighborhoods. What they allow a group of people to do is focus attention. The diagram gives you a sense of the various kinds of things they focus on. It's a combination of having volunteer members, but also staff. And the staff becomes a key part of this. Not only work with the retailers and the merchants and the property owners, but then carry on the kind of events and activities that we've described here, because everything from improve the leasing, but also the activation and the marketing of the area. This is just a diagram that suggests the kind of complexities of being able to target that organization to various important things. But the other opportunity for organization here is actually to think about the Kentlands itself and to form something that's even, if you like, broader. It would have within it the Main Street effort, but it would bring together the key parties, and we've talked about them: Metamune, Main Street Task Force, BF Sol, Kimco, the city, and probably the KC and the LCA, who would work together not only to help focus on matters that relate to the retail on Main Street, but would look at the entire area and really help you sort of, if you like, bring together all the partners that make it easier perhaps for the city to figure out what's the future direction. This is very much the kind of I headed something similar to this in downtown Washington. It really was the means by which we could organize ourselves on the private sector and then enter into the conversation with the city with a higher degree of certainty that we can get to the kind of joint results that we both look for.
And I'd like to add that we've had multiple meetings with all of these parties on this chart at the top. And this is not new to any of them, and they're all very interested in the concept.
So to form an organization of that scale, as opposed to the one that deals with Main Street, is more closer to $300,000 to $400,000 a year. And its job would be, as I said, to both enhance the retail experience, to market and promote a brand for the downtown Kentlands, and then move forward with other set of agendas. There are many different kinds of benefits for different parties, and we just laid them out here. You can sort of see them, but everything from increasing the tax base of the city to a more thriving, dynamic Main Street for the residents. One thing we'd like to point out, however, is that very specifically is the fiscal impacts of a more vibrant and vital area. We did what's called a fiscal impact analysis. It was conducted by the Fuller Institute. I don't know if you're familiar with this at George Mason. And what they did is they essentially looked at the sum total of taxes generated and the expenditures on the part of the city side for that area. If you look very narrowly at simply the Kentlands sort of town center or the downtown area, last year the revenues were about $1 million. The expenditures were $10,000 more. You had a net fiscal impact. You actually put more money into it than it generated generally. That actually could be accounted for by the very fact that the movie theater was closed. If the movie theater were open. But the point I would really make there is if you look at that area within there, if you look at your comprehensive plan for that area, the master plan, you have the potential to build some sort of 5 million square feet of space. This will be in the future a very big, important center of the economic activity. And you can see this if you look at the greater Kentlands area. That area is much larger there. That's about, I think, 17% of your land mass. It's generating 23% of your revenues. It generated $13 million last year, 13.7. You can see the expenditures. The net fiscal impact was about $4.5 million, which was 50% of your police department budget. So it's actually an area that well, on one hand, it takes care of itself. It's actually helping you finance other needs throughout the city. Lastly, I just want to draw your attention to the kind of partnership models that exist, the public-private cooperation. That's very typical throughout the region. People are well aware of downtown Frederick, which is nearby, and you can just see the size of that organization. You can see the kinds of commitments that the cities make. Tacoma is very much the same, and if you actually go over to Arlington and the area called Columbia Pike, which the county feels very strongly about, their budget's about $500,000 a year, and in that case, the county's committing almost 76% of the income. So you have the idea of, we want to present to you the idea that you have an organization, but it needs support from both parties, both public and private, and it really allows, again, both parties to make investments together.
So John and I in the beginning both mentioned that the community has invested funds in this project. They've invested just slightly above $100,000 to bring us to this critical stage. We invite the city to make a business decision to also invest in this effort with the expectation that a cohesive downtown Kentlands operating to its full potential will reap solid returns in the form of increased tax revenue, which then can be used to benefit other areas in the city of Gaithersburg. We don't expect the city to make a full match to what the community has contributed, but to potentially meet us halfway. There's a lot of differences between this initiative and those that have failed in the past. One is the financial support from the community, the work already done, and a clear path to an organizational structure. But another difference that we need funding for is that we need a paid executive director. This can't be a volunteer-only initiative. Those have failed in the past and will fail going forward. John has generously volunteered to provide leadership to the Alliance, and Neil's going to provide leadership to the Main Street group, but they can't do it alone. They need administrative and organizational support. So our plan is to retain an executive director for a 6-month contract to keep all the stakeholders at the table and working collaboratively until the Alliance and the Main Street group are solidly underway. And that's it with 2 minutes and 47 seconds to spare. Are there any questions?
I really appreciate you guys getting that done. I mean, when I was reading the presentation over the weekend, I said, there's no way. But you guys, very much appreciate all the work that you guys have put into this and thought into the structure and to what would make things work or not. My feeling, and we'll hear from the council after I get done spouting off, my feeling is that we should get a recommendation for our staff should sort of huddle up, particularly our economic development department and our city manager should huddle up and provide us with some recommendations with regard to it. So,
and we will be submitting this in writing with more detail.
Great. Who'd like to speak to this? Ryan.
Yeah, well, first, let me echo what the mayor said about thanking you all for your good work, and we have a great brain trust here. It was very impressive to hear everyone's background at the beginning of the presentation, and obviously you've done a lot of really good, thoughtful planning work, so thank you for that. And thank you for anticipating what was going to be my main question, which is, you know, as much as the intentions are good, how do we make this effort different from the ones that have not panned out very well in the past? I hearken back to one of the very first things I worked on when I first joined the city council back in 2007. The Market Square Advisory Committee, for those who remember that, was sort of winding down and trying to figure out what its next iteration was going to be, and we started talking about, you know, how the city and the community and the businesses on Main Street and around that area could figure out a way to sort of keep it going and expand the effort to support the businesses there. I remember we fought to get something like $50,000 in one-time funding, early 2008, that time frame for
Right at the beginning.
yeah, for banners, you know, to go up on the light poles and for signage, and we even cut a few corners to kind of get the bureaucratic process of getting signs up moving a little faster, and we got a few signs up. They weren't quite as pretty as what we wanted, but at least we were getting some progress done. And then, you know, that sort of happened, and then kind of status quo, static for a number of years, and other nonprofit organizations and different efforts to try to get the ball rolling again, working together with the city sometimes, not working together with the city other times. And so my big question was, what do we do differently this time to kind of make it more permanent, make it more effective? And to hear you talk about there being a full-time executive director as sort of the way forward, it's very, very interesting. Unfortunately, your timing's not great because we're voting on the annual budget tonight, I think, right? But that doesn't mean we can't, as the mayor said, get staff together to get some recommendations to us. And we have different pools of money even after the budget is passed to look at and decide whether it makes sense to take from those pools of money to invest resources on economic development. Obviously, we all very much want the Main Street area and downtown Kentlands to succeed. I think I speak for all of us up here when I say we're very excited about the prospects that Kimco and Saul are putting forward for the midterm and the long term. It'll be a bit bumpy. There'll be some things we disagree on. But at the end of the day, we do still have all these many different owners. And that makes it harder than a place like, say, Washingtonian Center, where you can have one management company just say, this is the way we're doing it, and that's that. So I'm looking forward to seeing how we can make this model with an executive director work and how we can overcome some of the challenges of the previous incarnations. But definitely excited about it and want to thank you all very much for your work.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So, you know, I have to agree with both Judd and Ryan on this. I think since I've been on the council since 2005, we've been wrestling with this and seeing starts and stops. I don't think we've ever seen anything this comprehensive or organized or well documented with a lot of research and background to, I think, justify the path forward, or what you're proposing as the path forward. I think the biggest challenge remains, as it always has been, is a cohesive ownership structure. You don't have one owner, you have 66, something like that. And their main interest is to make sure that they don't have any vacancies in the properties that they own. So getting them to buy into the whole idea of how this fits into the new urbanism model, how that fits with the rest of the Kentlands marketplace, retail marketplace, whether it's Kimco or Saul, I think that's very important. I think beginning kind of as the spine of this being Kentlands Boulevard is what we've been talking about recently here as well. So that's certainly part of it. So I think this is much more promising than the efforts we've seen before. I think it makes sense to employ a full-time ED to keep this moving forward. Excuse me, keep this moving forward. And so there's some more enthusiasm here that I've seen, and I've seen, you know, there's much greater buy-in, it seems, from the Kentlands Citizens Assembly and the Lakelands Assembly as well, that I think was missing from previous efforts. I think everybody now recognizes how important it is to develop this section of the city and how that would benefit everything around it. So I think having our staff look at some of these ideas, figuring out where we can best step in to provide support and assistance and be part of the partnership that develops is what we need to wait for next. And yeah, that's the problem, is that we're voting on the budget now. So I think we have to have this long-term vision. I've talked about Kentlands as being a grand experiment and largely successful, except for kind of the retail and the live works. The experiment's not over, and I think this is just the next step. You know, I'm a scientist. When you do an experiment and the one doesn't work, you try and figure out why it didn't work, and you come up with a new model. So, and a new approach. So I think this one seems to have a lot more behind it to make it succeed. So I'm positive about, I have a positive feeling about this.
Rob?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I'll start by saying I don't quite have the longevity that my colleagues have with respect to the various initiatives and iterations that have occurred in the area. But it seems to me that right now with this is the opportune time. We've seen movement with Kimco, we've seen movement with the Sol Center, and you know, one of my concerns with that, and I'm sure it's a concern that's shared, is that I don't want to see Main Street left behind with the large-scale developments next to it that may occur over the next few decades. So this sort of energy, this sort of project, I think it's well received at this point in time. I'm looking forward to seeing it develop. I think, you know, there are ways the city can support this, but I think we need to hear more about it. We need to see more development of the ideas and the partnerships. So I attended a evening session. I think it was put on by you guys. You were there at it was in the Kentlands, and there was a presentation from folks from Frederick, from folks down in DC somewhere, Adams Morgan.
Yeah.
And then there was someone else, and one of the things that kept getting repeated over and over again was this concept of the business improvement district. And there was discussion of how that might be applicable here in the Kentlands. And I saw it mentioned on the slide. Is that something that's still on the table? Or are we talking about that as a funding mechanism for any ongoing?
Not at this time, because you would need 51% of those 66 owners. We recognize, we've met with many owners. We have a lot of owners that are quite interested in being part of the Main Street group. We're not going to get to 51% of them anytime soon.
Okay.
And so we're going to start with the ones that we have to work on leases and make improvements and get our funding from other sources.
Okay. And then on the slide it mentioned clustering. How is that going to be obtained? How would you conceive that?
I'm sorry.
The clusters?
Oh, go ahead.
I mean, you can't
Okay.
force any of those 66 owners
Correct.
to rent to a specific
Correct.
category.
The whole idea behind the cluster is that we don't have any space big enough to be an anchor.
Mhm.
Right now, the chocolate shop is a semi-anchor just because it does draw traffic to Main Street. Obviously, any plans for Main Street are very long-term as well as Kimco's and Sol's. It's all very long-term. They have long-term leases. They come up sporadically. And the idea is to provide leasing assistance for what we call targeted leasing, meaning you don't just stick a sign in the window. You actually make an effort to go out and find the types of businesses you want in that space, and then work creatively on some of the leasing arrangements, either a share of the revenue plus a base or something like that. So it'll take time.
I just want to say this is a case of mimicking what Neil does at Federal Realty. There's someone there on staff who gently focuses on this issue of the mix, finds tenants. In this case, there'd be another step engaged here, but it's the same kind of idea. So and to bring that sense of the market, but also then suggest in certain areas there's certain clusters that would work side by side. But it's bringing an intelligence, if you like, and a focus of energy to the needs of the leasing.
I mean, it's interesting. It's just with so many owners, it might be difficult. And then the final question was, KCA delivered a interesting, informative report to us about a business analysis, a market retail analysis for the area, and their concern was with oversaturation of retail. And obviously, this is within that area. I mean, have you guys looked at the impacts of on Main Street with respect to Sol, Kimco, other developments that are occurring there, and how Main Street's going to strategize to not be consumed in that oversaturation?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the analysis that was done by the other consultants indicated that at best there would be maybe 40 to 50,000 square feet over the next almost decade. So there's, first of all, not a lot of retail that's coming. So you're right in the sense of oversaturation. Market conditions are changing very quickly. However, the kind of retail we're talking about Main Street is a very different kind of Main Street. It's the maker market. It's a very specific kind of, it's really entrepreneurship. It's people breaking in. It's the one-of-a-kind kind of thing, looking for a unique destination. And there are people like that, and there are entrepreneurs like that out there. So that's the kind of market to really look for Main Street, because it really is not, you're right, it'll never be able to compete with the kinds of tenants that Saul and Kimco will get.
Okay, so a different niche, that's interesting.
Different niche, exactly.
Lorianne.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. So I actually attended the presentation, I think it was last week, that was held at the Kentlands Mansion, but I missed the Q&A and really wanted to hear some of the feedback from the residents during that time. But I come from a background of research, so I really enjoyed the thoughtful market research that was done, and love looking at the comparisons, because we always talk about, you know, downtown Frederick and some of the other areas that we like to see here in the city. Even here in Old Town, we're looking at ideas from neighboring jurisdictions and how we can incorporate those to really revitalize the area. And I think, as Mike mentioned, seems like the Kentlands has been almost a project almost, and let's try this, see how this works, and now we're in a new phase of transition. So I'm glad that we've come to realize that we can't put any more retail space in that area, and experience is key. So I'm curious to see what ideas come about from that phase of the development as we continue to evolve. Since the other businesses, you mentioned that you probably don't think you'll get to 51% in order to qualify for the bid. What role would those businesses who haven't bought into this idea, what role do they play in? Do you anticipate any pushback, or are they?
Yeah, so we, at the Q&A that there was some discussion there, some
Okay.
loud discussion at times. But the owners of the live-work units, I think, you know, right now we've gotten to about 15 to 20 of them, which most of them are very supportive of the idea. Even the person that was at the Q&A that was a little concerned was involved in the early discussions and very supportive of the idea. In general, what we would do is bring as many of them in as quickly as possible. Some would serve on the board. The board of the Main Street area would probably be at least 5 or so owners on that board, and really get their input, get their ideas, and get them, you know, as part of this to be our cheerleaders basically for everybody else. You know, the beginning would probably have to do with streetscape and leasing and things like that, that aren't well organized now.
Okay. I'm not sure if Saul and Kimco have seen this presentation, or how you're working with them, and how this will ultimately fit into the larger picture. Because I know we talk about the vision and what we want for, you know, Kentlands cohesively.
They work in
fit.
other parts of the region where this kind of cooperation among public and private sectors takes place. So I think they're open to it. I think what they're looking for is to make certain that everybody else, if they participate and they're willing to talk about participating financially,
Yeah,
as well as the
that's what I
sharing
was
of their
going to
plans,
ask.
they want to make sure everybody else is participating. So I think that's the message they've sent to us. You know, if the Main Street has to be organized, they also would like the city to participate, and Metamunis. If they're all come together, I think they will come together. And that's really a good body of the work that has to take place in the next 3 or 4 months. That's really what we need staff for, is to,
Okay.
that organization, to bring it together, to figure out exactly what that budget is, to look at issues, not only like the kind of leasing support and activation, but also the kind of physical improvements. So there's a comprehensive plan that then they would participate in the funding, the fully funding of that.
So would you bring them to the table once a sustainable funding, I guess, budget is?
They would be part of that conversation as well,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. No, I think that was it. Thought it was a great presentation. Looking forward to seeing what's next.
All right. And I'm assuming you're holding back for the.
Apparently, I have to recuse myself since I'm a LiveWorks owner, so I'll pass at this point, but you guys have already heard from me at great length, so.
Great. Thank you all for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
We'll move forward with this conversation shortly, I suppose. Okay, so next we have public comments. This is the time when the mayor and council like to hear from anybody who wants to speak about anything that's not a public hearing topic. Tonight we have no public hearings, so essentially anything you want to speak about is fair game. We asked, and this includes, of course, if you want to testify about the potential school at Kelly Park. What I'll say, I'll just give everyone some ground rules here. We are going to presumably take a vote tonight on whether or not to authorize the city manager to enter a negotiation with MCPS on Kelly Park. That said, we've heard from a lot of people. We got tons of input on the subject. We want to hear from everybody in the room. We recognize that there are multiple viewpoints in the room. We ask that everybody is respectful of everybody else's viewpoints, which this crowd, many of whom are familiar faces, has been very respectful, and it's much appreciated here. Everyone gets one trip to the podium, up to 3 minutes. State your name and address or neighborhood if you feel more comfortable that way. When your time is down to 30 seconds, the timer will beep and turn yellow. When your time's up, it'll beep and turn red. I think I covered everything. Who would like to be our first speaker? Jim, come on up. And anybody else who'd like to speak, feel free to line up right behind Jim.
Thank you, Mayor. Hello, members of council. Jim McNulty, president of the Saybrook Homeowners Association. I've been up here enough times, I don't think I really need to restate my position on the potential of building at Kelly Park. But I do want to thank the mayor and the council for your genuine attention and time and resources that you have put against this issue. From the moment that we learned that this was a possibility, between the phone calls and the emails and the in-person meetings and various council members reaching out to the community and meeting in person with people and really, asking questions and trying to understand all sides of the issue. I think the city should feel comfortable knowing that our elected officials really have been doing their due diligence on this, and even if it doesn't go the way that one particular side feels is the right way, I personally feel like our elected officials have been doing their best to try to come up with a solution that helps as many people as possible. I moved here in 2009, and that fall I enrolled my daughter in Gaithersburg Elementary. As it was time 4 years later for my son to go to school, my wife and I decided that Gaithersburg Elementary was a little bit overcrowded for Sean and that he would get left behind. So we decided then to start looking at other options, and we decided to send our children to St. Martin's across the street here in Old Town. And I'm very proud to say my daughter is graduating from St. Martin's this Thursday. I'm very proud of her. But we had that choice because we had the resources to be able to do that. Not everybody has that choice. And quite frankly, in Montgomery County and Gaithersburg, people shouldn't have to make that choice, whether to send their children to an overcrowded school. We know we need a school here, and MCPS and the Board of Education has done a lot of research. We had an election last year, and we all, I think, pretty much agreed that we needed new schools. And it's teed up for us at this moment. It may not be the ideal solution, but when is it ever ideal? I love Kelly Park. I live blocks from Kelly Park. I've coached Little League at Kelly Park. I taught my son to play tennis at Kelly Park. I've shot hoops at Kelly Park. It is part of what makes that part of the city great. But I do think there's ample room to share that space, and I do think a school over there that kind of galvanizes the community and allows us to have something to which we can all attend and really bring us all together could be transformational for our area. and also creates an indoor space that we don't have access to currently. And I think that would be tremendous for our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Two notes before we go on to the next speaker. Doris, our city clerk, made an announcement before the meeting. Everyone's welcome to hold up signs, but we asked for the consideration of people behind you that you keep it, unless you're in the back row, you can hold them as high as you want in the back row. But if you're anywhere but the back row, just keep them chest high. That would be considerate. The other thing is I wanted to mention that we do have, I did see, although I don't see her now, we did have, oh yeah, way in the back we have Rebecca Smodrowski from our Board of Education here to observe this proceeding, so just wanted to point her out. Who'd like to be our next speaker? Come on up.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Yardley Perez and I live at Newport Estates 3. I would like to start by saying that building a school is bad because, as how I said last time, traffic will be really busy and nobody wants way more busier traffic at 5 p.m. and in the morning. And that sometimes some people might think that nobody goes to Kelly Park because they don't want to, but that's probably not the reason why. It's because sometimes kids or people don't go to Kelly Park because kids are at school, and it wouldn't make sense like that parents would go by themselves to Kelly Park and like, this might sound kind of funny, but like be on the swings and they have fun. So it would be kind of weird, and that, yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, thank you, Rodney. You're getting used to testifying in public meetings. Let's see. You're gonna be a regular here. That's good. Next speaker, who'd like to come up? Come on up. And anybody who wants to line up behind Jason, just speed it up if everyone who's gonna speak just lines up and we go one after the other.
So I'm Jason Wilcox with the Education Enrichment Committee, resident of the Kentlands. Mr. Mayor and esteemed council members, the City of Gaithersburg's Education Enrichment Committee, or EEC, thanks you for the opportunity to share our thoughts on solutions for overcrowding in the Gaithersburg cluster. We appreciate that the city has begun a conversation about the proposed use of Kelly Park as a site for a new elementary school in the Gaithersburg cluster to alleviate overcrowding. As such, we encourage the city to enter into a formal dialogue and negotiate with Montgomery County Public Schools concerning a shared use arrangement of the land located at Kelly Park Field, in which the school would enjoy use of its building and fields, and the public would have access to the school's amenities, public space and equipment, as well as the ball fields. These discussions should include hours of use and costs to each party, and should secure MCPS's consent to allow the city to make use of the school at no cost. As a group tasked with working closely with schools and nonprofits supporting schools and drawing on our extensive personal experience as parents, volunteers, or MCPS staff, the EEC is keenly aware of the issues associated with overcrowding. We have seen firsthand the strain that overcrowding has on our schools' physical resources. Limited library hours and computer time, smaller play areas, and overcrowded cafeterias, gyms, and all-purpose rooms are just part of the challenges. MCPS does a great job to keep classroom sizes from being impacted, but support staff is strained, as schools still have limited numbers of counselors, administrators, nurses, and related personnel. Routine events like assemblies, as well as arrival and departure, are also problematic. The addition of a new elementary school at the Kelly Park site will help to alleviate these issues in the Gaithersburg cluster. However, the EEC believes that it is important that the Kelly Park site offer a continuum of services and amenities to the general public even after conversion of the site to an elementary school. The current community park has tennis courts and a playground. The site sketch offers a rebuild of the tennis courts to the left of the school, and obviously, the school will have a playground, presumably with more equipment than the current park offers. The map depicted in the test fit case study shows a very small school footprint that we understand would involve the construction of a multi-level school with a small or even no impact on the surrounding environment. A buffer for the small stream immediately to the right of the school building should, and we understand will, be maintained. We believe that the conversion of the Kelly Park site to a new elementary school will be beneficial for both the Gaithersburg cluster and the community at large, and fully support this capital improvement project. We look forward to being part of the future conversations and discussions with the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Come on up, Chantal.
Hi.
Chantal, just grab that mic and point it right. There you go. Perfect.
Like that?
Yeah.
Is it better? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, my name is Chantal. I live in the Whetstone Run neighborhood. And you've heard it all. You've heard all the positions, all the for, against, whatever. But I want to bring another thought to you tonight. Is we're not talking about negotiation between the city manager and MCPS regarding the building of a school in Gaithersburg. We're talking about authorizing negotiation regarding the building of a school on Kelly Park. So if you enter any negotiation with them, that means it's Kelly Park. I'm sorry, Rob, there's no other way. It is my wish tonight, those who want the school understand the difference, as we're not their enemies, and I hope they do. Now we have over 1,700 names of people opposing the project at Kelly Park. And if this is not enough for you, to consider that Kelly Park and your authorization goes through anywhere, please understand that the character concept the city is so proud of is no more than a joke. As that authorization to negotiate between the city and MCPS on Kelly Park side will not be better than bullying. So right now we have a number of choices. We have Kelly Park, a number of. Rob, you were bringing the idea the other day about using the land next to Saybrook Oaks, at the end of Saybrook Oaks, okay. Now the problem with that is they will still use the same street, the same access street. Nobody's going to build a new street. We're not going to buy into that. So they would double the traffic that they already have. And that would infuriate Saybrook residents because of the traffic. Now, there must be a different way to approach the issue than by upsetting one part of the population against another. I would say, please authorize negotiation between the city manager and MCPS. Not on building a school on Kelly Park or next to Forest Oak School, but on building a school somewhere else in Gaithersburg. And I want to add something briefly. I looked at the schedule for tonight, the full package, and I noticed page 102 that the objectives are to preserve, enhance, maintain open spaces, environmental infrastructure. Page 127, preserve green space for passive, active, recreation. Page 138, carefully weigh impacts of developments and annexations on public infrastructure.
Chantal, thank you.
Let me finish my sentence, just the end of the sentence. And the environment with the city's economic development, sustainable growth, and quality of life objectives. So I applaud your efforts, but how can you reconcile those things?
Thank you, Chantal. Anything further, you're welcome to submit in writing. Please, come on up.
Hi, how are you? Carolyn Garvey. I live in the Saybrook neighborhood. I'm also a representative of the PTA for the Gaithersburg cluster. And then for some of you who don't know, I was actually part of the site selection committee, and I would like to give sort of my perspective of that process. Not just only to the council tonight, but I know we have some representatives from the MCPS tonight, which is great because I'd love for them to hear that as well. During the site selection meetings, MCPS presented Kelly Park site as a large enough location to be shared, I want to emphasize the word shared, with the city to use as a public park and school. MCPS representatives also assured myself and the site selection committee members that there was an adequate space for school and ball fields. Now, was Kelly Park the best site? Given the options that were presented to the site selection committee, it was, based on those options. But if the city has another site option, they could offer MCPS a site that could not take away a city park adjacent to 4 neighborhoods that MCPS is not able to guarantee will go to the new school. I hope it can be considered. Given that, I still encourage the city to negotiate a shared school in a park area moving forward. But I would like to leave the door open for other options if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker. Come on up.
Good evening, Joanne Zeidman, 20-year resident of Saybrook. I have a daughter that graduated from Gaithersburg High School last year, a Gaithersburg High School freshman, and an MCPS employee, not at the affected cluster though, but having worked in Gaithersburg Elementary School and currently being a kindergarten teacher, overcrowding is obviously a very serious problem. Nobody wants to pave over the park. Nobody wants to destroy the wetlands. Many of us, not all of us, see during the day when we pass by Kelly Park is a lot of nothing, and we know that the space could be better utilized. And I've publicly shared photos and emailed them to you with my thoughts and tweeted. I'm sure you're sick of it, but that's okay. It's my civic duty to speak for the children. And as was already brought up, character counts in our city, and we want to do what's right for our children, and we want to build a school in a place that's walkable and centrally located to relieve the overcrowding at schools like Gaithersburg, where a dozen portable classrooms means that literally hundreds of children are fighting to use one bathroom, one stall, one set of 3 or 4 stalls, and where the health technician or the nurse can't possibly even care for all of the children who've had accidents, fallen at recess, and thrown up all over their classroom. So this is, maybe it's not the best site, but it's definitely worth us making a go at to have a centrally located, walkable school for these kids so that they can have an even greater chance at education without wasting 20 minutes just to get to a bathroom, and being able to take advantage of the book festival and the books and everything that they don't even have time to get to the library because the media specialists can't see 900 children in 1 week. It's not possible. So those are my thoughts. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Everyone gets points for bringing up the book festival. Just
I'm glad I didn't have to deal with muddy boots last time. Anyway, my name is Pam Plaisted, Saybrook neighborhood. In reading over the stuff that you all have in your packet, that you received a lot of stuff. Amazing comments from people who signed the Save Kelly Park online petition. You know, generations and generations of people saying, hey, we've gone there since we were kids. You know, maybe they don't live in that area anymore, but there are new people coming in. I'd like you to consider those new generations that would like to make those memories at the park. So just a few thoughts I'll just throw out at you, kind of like softballs. Perhaps you can add some more space to Gaithersburg Elementary School, a 2-story wing or something like that. And in the meantime, during that construction, have those kids go to the holding facility. And that way you can do 2 birds with 1 stone. Change the boundaries so that kids from Laytonsville stay where they live. And the map that is in the November 14th, 2017 site selection packet, it's an amazing boundary map. If you haven't seen it, which I'm sure you have, take a look at it. You know, so that those kids can stay where they are instead of being bused through the Magruder cluster. You know, it's kind of ironic. They're being bused right through another cluster. So, you know, so that you can perhaps ask the Board of Education, what are other ways that test scores can be improved besides busing people from other clusters or other neighborhoods so that, you know, the concerns of MCPS are fulfilled. You know, add new classes to Washington Grove. I talked to a woman who said that there are only 2 5th-grade classes at Washington Grove. I don't know that to be true. That's just what she told me. I'm sure Rebecca and other people can tell you. But the MCPS-owned site that is on Emery Grove Road, known as Woodward's Road, that is 1 mile from Kelly Park. It does not make sense. You know, why the big deal about Kelly Park? It's only 1 mile, according to Google. And then also it has the ability to be have an access road right off of Mid-County, just like Shady Grove Middle School does, and that's about another mile away. So I'm just kind of throwing these things out. Also, why weren't neighborhoods not informed, including Saybrook, at its annual meeting? The meeting was November 20th. The site selection was dated November 14th. The Safe Kelly Park group has worked very hard. We're just a bunch of volunteers, but we're working to conduct our activities with a standard of doing unto others as we would want them to do unto us. And although we're not perfect, there was no attempt whatsoever at deception, and we find it a moral outrage that anyone would accuse SKP or of this or anything like this to the city in a public record. So I'd like you to consider those comments very seriously. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Steve Plaisted, Pam's husband. As you can see, opposites do attract, although we're not opposite on this issue. I'd like to start, before getting to my prepared remarks, by saying I walked through Kelly Park on the way here today, and it was just bursting with activity. The idea that it's underutilized is really not true at all. And as far as I can tell, every single person there was what we would call minority. And so, on to my prepared remarks, it's unthinkable that if the city does not make Kelly Park land available for use as a school, that the Board of Education and the state would seek to take the land through eminent domain powers in light of all the realities and the degree of controversy regarding this issue. If the Board of Education decides to redirect its money to another location outside the city because the city will not give up the park, there are other legal measures that can be used to prevent this, such as a lawsuit for an injunction requiring the Board of Education to do what it's required to do to educate the children in the city of Gaithersburg. It is also true that the city of Gaithersburg has no legal or moral obligation to address overcrowding in the public schools or any other aspect of the education of children in the city. That obligation ultimately belongs to parents who can choose not to send their children to a particular school or to live in a particular school district if the parents don't think their children will get an adequate education there. Just as Jim McNulty did, just as my wife and I did, in our case, at significant sacrifice. We didn't have the means to do something else. We just went without just about everything for 14 years in order to send our daughter someplace else, which was private school and then homeschooling. And no resident of the city of Gaithersburg who enjoys the use of Kelly Park or who might in the future has a moral obligation to give up the park in order to reduce overcrowding in the public schools. And no resident of Saybrook or Whetstone Run or the other two large communities that are within walking distance of Kelly Park or who bought their homes knowing that they had Kelly Park nearby, some even bordering Kelly Park, have a moral obligation to sacrifice the value of their properties in order to reduce overcrowding in the local schools, especially when other viable options exist, including a suitable parcel of land that the Board of Education already bought and designated for the purpose of building an elementary school only a mile from there. Therefore, I don't think it would be wise to enter into any negotiations with the Board of Education over Kelly Park, even if you don't want the school to be constructed there. I think the city should simply say no with respect to Kelly Park and give its reasons to the Board of Education and make suggestions for alternative options. If you are open to the prospect of giving up Kelly Park for the school, you should make it a legally binding requirement that the best elements of the park be preserved for use by the public at all hours, and that children who live closest can attend the school and don't be manipulated by fear of losing something if you stand strong. I've got copies of my statement.
Okay, you can just leave them, leave them up there.
Thank you.
Who'd like to be the next speaker?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Mark.
Grab that mic there.
You saying I'm short? Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Mark Ezrin. I live in the Lakelands, and I've got a little bit of benefit to add. I live walking distance a half mile from Lakelands Park Middle School, and for our community, it's been a great sharing experience. The city, the Department of Rec, as well as MCPS have been great neighbors, and they've done a great job sharing together. I think it's been a lot of value add for our community. So during the day, we obviously have a school that our kids can walk to. My kids had that benefit. And after school, there are some activities and fields that take place via MCPS on that property. And then as we all know, after late afternoon, evening, it's open up for City Rec Department and other organizations. And I see as soon as school is over, it is just, hustle and bustle there. All kinds of kids playing through different leagues, different sports programs. Afternoon, just free walking around, using open space when they can. Parents jogging around the park. So I think from that standpoint, the way I look at it, you have nothing to lose, at least in starting to begin a dialogue and see if you can have a similar successful relationship like we have in the Lakelands. So that's all I had to add.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, I'm Mary Pat Collins, and I'm Secretary of the Board at the Villa Ridge Condominium. We could not come to an agreement as a board because we're such a mixed community. We have a lot of retired people who really have no say or really care whether there's another elementary school. We have a lot of people with children who would really welcome walking their children to school rather than waiting on Girard Street for the school buses to show up. So from our perspective, there would be a lot less traffic on Girard Street and thus in the morning rush hour getting to like the MARC train or other locations if we had a walkable elementary school. On a personal note, my granddaughter, I'm raising a granddaughter. She spent 2 years at Gaithersburg Elementary in a very crowded school. It was not only the school was crowded, but the aftercare was crowded. So I made the decision to put her in St. Martin's, and it was a sacrifice. I'm a retired person, and you know, it's a significant amount of money, but I had to put her education first. That I kind of did it kind of sadly. I wish there had been a Montgomery County public school that would have met her needs, but they weren't. So on a personal note, I welcome a new elementary school. I welcome the lessening of the bus traffic in my own neighborhood, Girard Street, and I hope you go forward with the negotiations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carolyn Donovan. I'm a resident of Saybrook. I also have 2 young girls. They're 5 and almost 2 rather. I just want to encourage the city to enter negotiations with MCPS. I think that at this point in the process, there simply is not enough information on the table to really evaluate whether or not Kelly Park is an appropriate space for an elementary school. I think that certainly the walkability factor is there and exists with the school, with the location. Certainly more so than any of the other sites that were evaluated in the site selection committee. Talking about traffic, the WSSC site, I drive through there many times a day between preschool and ballet lessons, and it's I can't imagine children walking through that intersection to get to school. As for Emery Grove or Woodward Roads, again, you're crossing over Mid-County Highway to access a location that's pulling students away from where the overutilization occurs. I don't believe that Kelly Park is anyone's utopian location for an elementary school. It's a wonderful park. I do believe that it is an underutilized space. As a stay-at-home mom with young children, I am at Kelly Park very frequently during school hours. We are often the only people there. I think that it is very crowded after 4 o'clock, which is when the space would be available to the other city residents. On the weekends, there are many people there, and that waxes and wanes. I think that over Memorial Day weekend we were there, and there were maybe 3 other families there with us on a beautiful day. I would like for the city to enter these negotiations, however, with the stipulation that the majority of the park is retained for the city. I am deeply concerned with the elements of the test fit site. A square peg sometimes fits in a round hole. It doesn't mean that it solves the problem. So that is very concerning to me. If there are other areas that would be available that were not considered by the site selection, I think that those are worth evaluating at this point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. My name is Lynn Slepsky, and I live in Saybrook.
Lynn, do you want to just grab, yeah, point,
Sure,
there you go.
thank you. As we move forward on the issue of Kelly Park, I would like to say a few more things. I represent the petition signers for Save Kelly Park. Last month, I gave you 1,440 signatures. Tonight, I give you an additional 76 paper. Our website has grown to by 185 to 698, so we have a total of 1,701 people who want to save Kelly Park. Of those, I have paper signatures from 348 Saybrook residents. We have 478 homes. We have 220 from Whetstone. They have, I believe, 85 homes. And the Audubon Board has gone ahead and advised you that their entire community supports saving Kelly Park. So I'm here speaking for them. I want to be clear about a few things. We recognize that Gaithersburg is in desperate need of a new elementary school to relieve overcrowding. NCPS is responsible for providing adequate resources, and they have not, and not for a long time. When I arrived here in Gaithersburg in 1995, my husband and I made a conscious choice that my girls would attend public schools, having spent their entire previous career in DoD schools. My youngest went to GES, and it was overcrowded and had portables even then. So I know what overcrowding is all about. However, I didn't send them to private schools, or I didn't ask that they be redistricted out of the cluster like some of my colleagues have. And I did that because we instead chose to embrace the diversity that existed there. On this day and age, and for what we pay in taxes, overcrowding shouldn't happen. And Montgomery County education dollars should stay in Montgomery County and not support other counties around us, especially given our current overcrowding situation. Our children deserve and are owed more. We think that there are better elementary school sites like Victory Farm Park, Woodward's Road, and while WSSC wouldn't be the top of my choice, it was the second of their choices. If you utilize the criteria of central walkable locations, decreasing the overcrowding and allowed for the continued use of Kelly Park, this would be a win-win. Kelly Park was built with $1.5 million, and both built and improved, and we want to keep those pieces there. Kelly Park is part of the fabric of our neighborhood, many of which are disadvantaged, and they have no other places. I applaud your efforts to work with us. I actually recommend that you negotiate with the board, but look for alternate sites.
Thank you, Lynn. Who'd like to be our next speaker? Come on up, Steve.
Mr. Mayor, Council, good evening. I hadn't really planned on speaking this evening.
Steve, you want to state your name, please.
Steve Kaufman, Audubon Square.
Thank you.
Hadn't planned on speaking, but hearing the testimony from the Secretary at Villa Ridge, really couldn't help but bring it up. The fact that the children are standing there on the street corner on Gerard being bused brings up the point of walkability. Can't really see any reason why children that live 150 yards away from an elementary school should have to be bused anywhere. My point being is if we build a Kelly Park, where are you going to bus them to and from? It really doesn't make any sense. We're going to have two schools, 1,000 yards apart. You're going to bus kids from point A to point B, and for what reason? If we're going to truly talk about walkability, let's consider any location, because children aren't going to be able to walk. You're going to put 30, 40, 50% of the kids on buses, moving from point A to point B. So it really doesn't make a difference whether you put it at Kelly Park or any other location, and I think there are more suitable locations that would be suited for traffic. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Come on up.
Good evening. My name is Mike McHugh. I live in the Whetstone Run, my wife and my 4 children. I grew up in inner city Philadelphia. One of the things that we prided ourselves on in our community was a life of active involvement in the community. And one of the staples of that was walkability. Walkability to features that the public as a whole could enjoy. We could walk to shops, we could walk to parks, we could walk to so many things. And when my wife from rural Pennsylvania did not want to live in a city, we settled on a compromise in the suburbs, to my family's chagrin. But what we found on Bell Grove Road is we found an opportunity for suburb living with a little bit of walkability to some amenities that I was able to experience as a kid growing up in Philadelphia, that I want my children to be able to experience. And primary to that was a public park. I know from experience working with schools, both private and public, the school almost always comes first. We talk about it being a public space, but during the hours that people want to utilize it, it is closed to those people. It's not open to all public. And I recognize the need for that, but a school needs to take care of its children, it needs to take care of its staff, and security. I know living right down from that school, me and my family will not be welcome walking along that place. We'll be looked at by security guards. We will not be able to use the amenities during the day as we would like to, as we are able to use them now. We go to Kelly Park on a regular basis during hours from 9 in the morning until 7, 8 o'clock at night. We see people of all different walks of life that are there at all hours, exercising, playing, gathering for recreation. I think our city should applaud these efforts. We shouldn't seek to eliminate green space. We shouldn't seek to eliminate options for our community to gather in recreation and in fellowship. I fear that a school there would do that. It would cater to a few at the denial of a larger group, especially without any assurances that our children can actually attend that school, much like Forest Oak Middle School. All the reports I've read said that they will not consider our neighborhoods for 18 months after construction has begun, and at that point it's really way too late. I'm a believer in the firm adage that if you give an inch, you give a mile. I think we say we're going to have a small footprint, MCPS is going to come back and say, no, we need a slightly larger one, a slightly larger one, a slightly larger one. We have more kids, we have more of this. I think that there are alternative sites that we can consider. I think Forest Oak Middle School has 40 acres on it and already all the amenities that we could share. I think that there's plenty of space that can be shared there without having to take away another space and deny access to a particular community. Thank you.
Do we have any other speakers?
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Shannon Johnson. I live in the Saybrook neighborhood and I have 3 children. I've been involved with this school overcrowding issue for the Gaithersburg cluster for the past 4 years, and I was recently discussing this with my grandmother, who's 93 years old. And in her day, she was a PTA president and very involved citizen in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And what she told me is in those days that if a school needed to be built, if they needed school funds, it was unanimous. Everybody said yes, everybody supported it. And I think what's unfortunately true here in Montgomery County is that we're basically still living with the legacy of the investment of the greatest generation. Gaithersburg Elementary was built in 1947, Washington Grove in 1956, Rosemont in 65, Summit Hall in 71, and finally Strawberry Knoll in 1988. Since 2007, enrollment has grown in our cluster and the elementary school level by 820 students. And we know that by 2040, according to the WashCog round 9.0 projections, the city's population is going to continue to grow by 1/3 up until that point. We need to think about not just the kids that are here today, but the kids are going to be here in the future. And if we look at what the kids that are here today have to deal with, it's pretty severe. At Gaithersburg Elementary, the lunch period runs from 10:30 in the morning to 2 o'clock. To make space for additional classrooms, special teachers and other staff in the schools have been relocated to areas that have been repurposed for their use, but that are not sufficient for their needs. This includes an art teacher who works from a cart and uses a very small closet as her office, 11 ESOL teachers who are distributed throughout the school in 5 very small rooms that were not intended for use by teachers, 6 special educators who share 2 small rooms, our PE teachers who use the cafeteria before and after lunch to conduct PE classes. We also have 7 focus teachers who use closets for small intervention groups. Some of those closets are even located inside of classrooms. We currently have 6 portables that are located behind the school and take up half of the recess area, including pretty much all of the blacktop. And we have 3 portables that are in the front of the school and that are accessible without ever entering the school. Many parents have expressed security concerns about those portables, and in fact, when my son was in the 4th grade at Gaithersburg, his portal was broken into in the middle of the night, and they weren't able to go back in for a week. So with that, I want to say that I think now's the time to find the solution for 3,200 students who across the cluster are impacted in just such a way every day. And we really need to enter into this negotiation. I'm really afraid that if we walk away now, we're not going to have a chance. I started this advocacy when my son was starting 3rd grade. He's finishing 6th grade. If everything works out, he would be in high school. So thank you.
Thank you. If I can remind everybody to please, if you're going to have any personal conversations, have them outside the room. We can hear it all up here. Just one note to, Shana mentioned the building of Washington Grove Elementary School, and that was the current building, but actually several of us attended the 125th birthday of Washington Grove Elementary School on Saturday. It used to be a one-room schoolhouse. And anyway, it's older than you even think. Beth, please go right ahead.
I want to first, I'm Beth from Saybrook, but I'm actually from the community on the east side. That's a song, I think. I do want to thank the councilman that met with us this week. We really appreciate it. We learned a lot. And we think that you should go ahead with the negotiation, but I think that you should find a different site. And I think there are plenty of sites out there. I have been called old more than you can imagine. And sometimes from
Beth,
age
please
comes wisdom.
address us.
Oh, no, well, sometimes from age comes wisdom, and maybe if we work together, we could
Beth,
resolve
please
this.
address the dais, please.
Okay, well, they can, maybe if we all, I wanted to make eye contact.
I know.
Maybe if we work together, we could all find a solution that would be very successful and still keep Kelly Park. So maybe, just maybe, the old folks and the young folks who will be old one day, and I hope you're upright and breathing at 72 like I am, maybe we could get together and solve this, and everybody would be happy. We'd have a school, we'd have a new boundary study, because trust me, if they don't do the boundary study, your children aren't going to go to a school that's built on Kelly Field Park either. So why don't we just get together and work this thing out and go to the city and negotiate, and who knows, we might all be smiling when it's all said and done. That's all I had to say.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Pamela Campos, and I'm a resident of the Saybrook community and a previous homeowner of the Audubon Square community. The east side of the city doesn't ask for much. Saybrook doesn't ask for much. We are a quiet community with over 400 homes. My family and I are lifelong Gaithersburg residents. We have lived in Saybrook for 25 years. Prior to this time, I lived 8 years in the Audubon community. I have 2 now adult sons who spent significant time playing soccer, baseball, basketball, playing on the playground, going to concerts in the park, and learning to ride a bike and then on to drive a car. What I'm trying to say is that we love Kelly Park and do not want to see it change, let alone the heavy traffic that will interrupt our neighborhood and cause an increase in more safety hazards. So why take that away from us? This includes communities, other communities, not just Saybrook, but also Newport, Villa Ridge, Audubon, and other adjoining communities. Can't remember them all, so I'm sorry if I forgot people. We continue to enjoy the park, and countless other people take advantage of the green space. In case you haven't noticed, there isn't much green space left around here. So please leave the one thing that we have on the east side alone. Let me ask you honestly, would you want this school in your backyard with no guarantees that neighborhood children could even attend. The school board made its decision because the public comment, before the public comment even began. You, the elected representatives of this council, have a financial responsibility to us, not the school board. So I urge you to vote against giving this property away, and I urge you to stand up for all of the homeowners. So we're not opposed to building a new school to resolve the overcrowdedness. Just don't do it in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Please come on.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, hi, I'm Dina Saunders from Audubon Square. I wasn't really planning on speaking, but we have 3 grandchildren, and when they come over to visit, they're like, oh, there's a park down the street. Let's go play. Come on, Grandma. If that park is taken away from them, when they come over, all they have is our neighborhood park, and they love a park. We have so much traffic in Audubon Square coming through. And just in the morning, just getting around that circle. Can you imagine school kids trying to cross that circle with no guarantee of their safety? And what's going to happen is, should there be a serious accident, who's going to be at fault? Because you guys decide, oh, we're going to put a school there. We do not want a school there. Put it anywhere else, but please save Kelly Park. It's the only park in the neighborhood that we have that we all love and we all cherish. So that's my comment. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Hello, Mayor and Council.
Welcome.
I've been asked to read, I'm Nancy Beach. I'm a original resident of Saybrook, and I've just been asked to read a wish list for our Save Kelly Park group. So first on the wish list is an alternate site in this order: a co-located at Forest Oaks Middle School with another route for ingress, egress, not through the neighborhoods. B, MCPS-owned Woodwards Road Middle School. C, WSSC site. These are the sites. 2, boundary study, redistricting for both the new school and Forest Oaks, including the 6 adjacent neighborhoods: Audubon Square, Hidden Creek, Newport Estates, Saybrook, Villa Ridge, and Whetstone Run. 3, appointment of a community advisory council, including representatives from both groups to support the city manager in negotiations. 4, access to city information. 5, state and county officials assist Gaithersburg with negotiations to ensure open, honest negotiations and the involvement of all stakeholders. 6, previously requested traffic study info without cost. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Good to see you. My name is Melissa McKenna. I live in Hidden Creek. It was my pleasure to serve as the Vice President of the Montgomery County Council of PTAs and as their Capital Improvements Program Committee Chair for several years. It is out of those positions and also serving on the Site Selection Committee that I come before you this evening with hopefully some greater insight. The path to this study and to this location started over 4 years ago with a capacity study in the Gaithersburg cluster. We can't send more students to Laytonsville, which was the first decision made. We can't send students out to Magruder and Wooten clusters, which was the second decision that was offered. We tried also to put an addition on Gaithersburg Elementary School. No school should have 1,000 elementary school students in it, period, no matter how it's laid out. So that came down to a new elementary school site. And I can tell you, having been around all of the 25 clusters in this county, almost all of them would be chomping at the bit to have this opportunity. And if Gaithersburg should decide not to enter into negotiations, which is just a first step, let's see what we can do. Let's see if there can be a land swap for other Board of Education land. Let's see if there are facility usage fees that we could take out of the equation. like the city of Rockville did when they added a gym to RMES number 5, which I can never remember the new name of. And let's recognize that this is a very rare opportunity for a $25 to $30 million investment for 740 students and pretty much community space for the city of Gaithersburg. Yes, it would not be available to the public during the day, but we've got the weekends for all kinds of faith groups, clubs, you've got your scouts, and of course city rec department programs as well. So it would be used year-round. So we'd be actually gaining a lot of space in the summer and the winter that we wouldn't have to use. If not there, where? And I hear a lot of folks asking, put it somewhere else. We were given 14 sites, many of them not close at all. And I know it seems very close to Gaithersburg Elementary School, but we are also trying to solve overcrowding at 3 other schools. Not Washington Grove right now, their capacity is to come. But at Strawberry Knoll and at Summit Hall, and yes, for Summit Hall, that extra time would make a difference. We have been granted by the Board of Education that they will open the boundary study 18 months before the school will open, which is great. It's usually 1 year before, and that's typical procedure. And they will look at the boundaries of elementary schools and middle schools in the cluster. And that's another win. So I think we need to be taking these wins with us as we look at possible solutions. Yes, there are other solutions out there. Believe me, it was a very hard choice, and other places in the county are also losing parks. So please don't feel like you're being picked on in particular. This is going on around the county because there is less green space everywhere. Please negotiate, do the best you can for the city. You owe it to our students. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Do we have any other speakers?
Good evening, Oscar Alvarenga, PTA President at Summit Hall Elementary School, and I just wanted to quickly thank everybody that has been on both sides very professionally, I think, given their opinions, and as a PTA President, getting the public's input is always what we seek. And I know that there is very heavy concerns of residents for Kelly Park, and I understand that. But representing my school as a school that is overcrowded and walking in the hallways of other schools, I do ask for you to enter negotiation. You maybe do not have a legal right, but you do have, I consider, the moral right to represent all the students in the Gaithersburg cluster. Not just a few students, and 700 students is not just a few students, it's a lot of students and a lot of families that would benefit from a new school. As I've stated before, when you go to any elementary school after hours, they're all packed. As people have stated here about minorities, which I can say I am one, I look like one, we will continue to use the parks and the school after it is built. Maybe during construction time we can't, but we will come back and we will play soccer and do our activities as we have always done at any school. And every neighborhood has benefited from elementary school or any school in their neighborhood. No property value has ever dropped because a beautiful school has been built there. New memories are created, new generations will come through, and I think that they would also appreciate that. Having a school that is walkable is a big deal. We say that a mile is not too far, but when you're 5 years old, a mile is far. So when you're a parent that you're taking kids in a stroller, an extra mile is far on rainy days, on cold days, on very hot days. So yes, even if we did bus them, I think that is the right thing to do, is to bus those students to that school. They would benefit from that. And the community at the end would benefit from it. So I just wanted to say that, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Not seeing any. Well, again, I have to thank everyone for very articulate, eloquent testimony, passionate on all sides. I think there's more than two sides here at this point. And we will, we have a few items and then we'll get back to it. We'll get back to this staff guidance later in the agenda. So we're gonna go on to from the mayor and council, and we're gonna start with Council Vice President Spiegel.
Lucky me, I get to go first. Well, let me just take a moment to address all the folks who are here tonight before I go into some of the sort of more general, less interesting comments that I would normally talk about. As I said a few meetings ago, and is still the case, and as I appreciate hearing from a couple of the speakers tonight who know and acknowledge this from having been involved in this process and perhaps other processes of public debate here in the city, we do take very seriously the views of everyone who expresses their opinion on these issues, whether it's verbally here at a meeting, whether it's by email, whether it's sending us a petition or a report that you've written with information that you've compiled. We've certainly received a lot of material, oral testimony and written material on this issue, and we have really looked at it, and we have really grappled with this issue and thought carefully about it. I do want to say that I appreciate those who are on the sort of part of the Save Kelly Park movement saying tonight, a few of you, it is worth at least having a negotiation. Nobody's talking about voting tonight to approve any final plan. But I do appreciate you thinking about it and saying, for those of you from the Save Kelly Park group who've said, let's at least enter negotiations. Maybe we can talk in part of that process with MCPS about, what feasibility there is for alternate sites. Maybe we won't be able to. We don't know yet because negotiations haven't started yet. But I realize when you are sort of entrenched in a position that you feel very passionately about, it can be hard to come to the middle a little bit. And so I just wanted to say thank you to those folks who did make that comment tonight. This is a difficult issue, obviously for all of you who are affected directly by it, who live in the neighborhoods around it, and who are involved in the school system and the PTAs. But I just want everyone to sort of stop for a moment and think that there's no benefit to us as elected officials sticking our thumb in the eyes of the voters. We certainly, whatever side each of us comes down on this issue, tonight for negotiations and in the future for any potential final agreement, there's no incentive for us to be trying to, antagonize, throw under the bus any particular community or hurt folks. There would be no reason for us to do that. You're our voters, So please do know that the motivations are pure here, and some of us may agree with you, and some of us may not, but we are really trying to do what we think is in the best interest of the long-term benefit of the city and its communities. So I do really appreciate that all of you have been so respectful, so thoughtful, and as the mayor said, eloquent in your comments. And we'll look forward to the presentation from the city manager in a few minutes and having that discussion. But moving on to a few other quick things that I wanted to say. Unfortunately, I have another kind of heavy topic that I wanted to address. As some of you are aware, this week we became aware that there was the distribution in a couple of neighborhoods within the city, and actually also in some parts of Frederick and other parts of Montgomery County, flyers advocating, frankly, repugnant racist views. And this is always a bit of a challenge for us as elected officials. At first, it appeared to be only one individual. He did not appear to be breaking any laws, and obviously his views, as loathsome as they might be, are protected by the First Amendment. And fortunately, incidents like this are relatively rare in our diverse community, but they do still happen. And the reality is they're happening with slightly more frequency now for a variety of reasons. And every time this happens, I personally struggle with how to handle it as a community leader, as an elected official, as a person of the Jewish faith, a descendant of Holocaust survivors in my family. I was always taught to speak out against hate whenever and wherever I see it, lest those who are doing the perpetrating think they can simply get away with it and that good people will just remain silent. As some of you may be familiar with the works of Elie Wiesel, who always talked about the need to speak out. On the other hand, if we draw attention to every small incident, we kind of give the perpetrator the attention and possibly the reaction that they want. And we amplify possibly a sense of fear and concern in the community that may not otherwise be justified. So it's a very difficult thing to think about what's the appropriate way for a community and a city government to react. So in this case, private citizens and residents of the community were sort of crowdsourcing the issue and making statements on social media and posting photos of the flyers and some were even posting videos of folks that they thought were the ones distributing the flyers. That was obviously not done by the government, and the government cannot improperly chill free speech, as I said, but private residents are certainly free to engage in their own free speech in reaction to these incidents. So originally I was still struggling with whether to say anything publicly tonight about this. But then, as I saw some reports of multiple incidents, not only in one neighborhood in Gaithersburg, but in another neighborhood on the other side of the city, and then reports that there was some activity like this happening in Frederick as well, I started to worry that it was maybe more of a coordinated, timed effort by different groups, and that kind of sadly helped make it easier for me to decide that it was worth saying something about. And I do think that we, as a city, have been good about condemning hate in the last several years as we've seen certain incidents arise. And I do think that we must condemn this now, again, with a loud and unified voice, because we are, despite our differences on a variety of issues, and always have been a welcoming and pluralistic community, and we celebrate our diversity, as we often say in Gaithersburg at our events, and we celebrate our common humanity. So, while racists and hate mongers may have First Amendment rights, we have them too. I want to encourage all of you to take the opportunity to exercise those rights. And I do think we need to continue to speak out. And I don't think we should be overcome by what some people have called hate fatigue. The more that these events happen, I think some of the folks perpetrating them are counting on that we're just going to say, oh, this happens so often now, we'll just ignore it, stay silent, accept it as the new normal. I think we do need to speak out. And so I want to invite a discussion among my council colleagues about what might be the appropriate response in terms of whether we should issue a formal statement or pass a resolution or a renewal of our past resolutions that we've passed in the last couple of years on these types of topics. But I did want to open that up, and I spoke with the mayor earlier, and even though normally we go around and each person has their own turn, I thought it might be appropriate for us to have this discussion now.
It's easier just to do this at once than every council.
So with that, Mr. Mayor, if you're okay with it, I'd love to hear from other folks.
Yeah, please,
as well.
Mike, go ahead.
So after Charlottesville, we felt pretty strongly about what happened and the need to make sure that everyone understood the city that we are, that we're a character count city. We mean what we say. And so we did. We voted on a resolution. And I'm just going to read you the last couple of sections of the resolution because I think this speaks to the very issue that we're talking about, and these are the things we talked about. So it's our position on these issues haven't changed at all, but I think it's important to restate that and make sure that people know that there's no room for this kind of these kinds of acts in our community. So there were 6 clauses in the resolution, and the last one is, whereas while speech is protected under the First Amendment of the Constitution, the city of Gaithersburg will condemn words, actions, or gatherings that promote hate, bigotry, and distrust, that diminish individuals or groups or faiths, or that are intended to discriminate, intimidate, or threaten the peace, welfare, and security of our residents and undermine the quality of life in our city. Now therefore be it resolved by the Mayor and City Council of Gaithersburg, Maryland, that the city hereby affirms its commitment to the values of equity, fairness, inclusion, and justice. So I think that's where we stand. I don't think there's any reason, I mean, I don't know how we would restate it in another resolution. We can be firm about it. We shared this with the National League of Cities, the Maryland Municipal League. I think other cities have done the same. And that time we were standing in solidarity with the council and citizens of Charlottesville, Virginia. Now we ask people to stand firm with us for the same reason. There's no place for this kind of behavior. We have the most diverse council in the state of Maryland, I believe, right here, right in front of you. You have Asian American, 2 Asian Americans, Mexican American, African American, 3 members of the Jewish faith. So it doesn't fly here. This kind of behavior doesn't fly. If you see it, call it out. And we hope that, that your children understand this as well. I think this kind of language is meant to intimidate as much as it is to create dissension in the community. And so I think that just reaffirming that, I think, is our position, and a very strong position. We don't see a need to change that.
Maureen. I went to Rob before you. I was trying to be fair.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Rob.
I was just going to say, well, before I go into my statement, I want to say, Mr. Mayor, you're very good at adding words to people's speeches today. You're helping them out.
Oh, thank you.
But
I don't know if that was facetious, but
everything I say. But anyway, you know, it shocked me when I read about what occurred in the Kentlands and what was being distributed. And I think Mike and Ryan eloquently stated all of our positions. I mean, we worked very hard on stating the position after Charlottesville, and it's reaffirmed here. The other incident that Ryan mentioned, it was actually a friend of mine that experienced that. She contacted me, and I was working with her on how to raise it sufficiently. And I'll emphasize here what I emphasized to her is, you know, it may be free speech on their part. It may not be a crime, but it needs to be reported. It needs to see the light of day so that we all know exactly what's going on in there, so that we can confront it as a community. And I think that's the important thing that we need to do, is to make sure that anytime speech such as this or actions such as might occur that are targeted at any segment of our population, that we as a community, not just elected figures, but everyone as a community needs to speak out against this stuff so that it just doesn't take hold. Just that.
Okay. Who wants to be next?
I'll go next.
Go ahead.
All right. So I just wanted to thank my colleagues for mentioning the issues with the letter that was circulated for Kelly Park, I mean in the Kentlands. As for our audience from Kelly Park, thank you again for always coming. Thank you for your passion.
Maureen, we're going to just sticking with this for now. I'm going to come back to you for the rest.
Okay, so for this, I mean, you know, when I heard about the letter, I was just as concerned. I don't know if you all are familiar with the Communities United Against Hate. It was formed, I think, last year. And we sought to address hate speech and hateful acts around the county. It was a nonpartisan community countywide coalition of advocates united against hate. Brian Frosch was also there. So although we can't legislate hate, I feel like something more is needed. What we did was a resolution for something that happened in a neighboring town. I think Neil mentioned it's in our backyard. What are we going to do? We had students who came here a few weeks ago, who asked us to propose, you know, a trust ordinance. And, you know, I think it's good that we have, you know, the resolution on file. But I'd like to explore what stronger statement can the city make in its capacity as leaders of this community, as diverse representatives of this community, and as representatives who espouse to represent all of our residents and make Gaithersburg the most welcoming and inclusive community. It shouldn't be hard to find a resolution. If our resolution is embodying who we are as a community and as a city, it should be as soon as we go onto the City of Gaithersburg website, that's the first thing we see. Who is Gaithersburg, what we're about. I just think it needs to be more clear that although we can't prosecute and press charges against people who trespass and, you know, put flyers in people's yards or other things, I think we have to take a stronger stance, and we have options that we can explore from neighboring jurisdictions. And, you know, I hope Lynn can advise us on the legality of what we propose and, you know, the difference between an ordinance, a resolution, a mandate, you know, what are our options. And I'd like to see where we go from here.
All right, so new statement, and so, okay, Neil.
All right, I don't agree. I think that what was done was terrible. It was, not physically violent, but it was bordering on terrorism in terms of really inciting fear in people. Like Ryan, I am named after two of my grandmother's brothers who didn't survive the Holocaust. My wife's family was pretty much wiped out except for her father and grandmother. She has no first cousins whatsoever, thanks to the Holocaust. So I had lunch with a member of the county council today, and I said that, basically we've been told that nothing can be done because of free speech rights, and this person said that they've taken this up with Chief Manger at the county police and is seeing what else can be done, because I think a resolution or an ordinance or whatever, it's just talk and it's not going to have any impact whatsoever beyond what we've already done. I'm very happy to talk to green shirts, and I'm very happy to talk to blue shirts. Brown shirts I draw the line at, I'm sorry. I think that I'm really not trying to be funny except for a little bit, but I think that this is a very serious situation. The flyers that were distributed in Lakelands were bad. They basically were white supremacist flyers that were distributed about 2 a.m. People did get it on video on their Ring doorbells, which I might now invest in. There was basically saying that white people are likely to not be a majority in this country, which is basically demographics, and that this country was founded by white people, and therefore we shouldn't allow brown people and black people and Jewish people and whatever in this country. And then a week later, in Flower Hill or Aspen Hill, one of those hills, Walnut Hill. I knew it was a hill. Distributed a flyer, about a 6-page flyer, basically saying Jews run the world and are in charge of all the media and are responsible for all the terrible things in the world. I mean, this was really like 1930s Germany stuff. Personally, I have no patience or no tolerance for this, and I'd like to see how far we can go in order to make sure that we fight back against this sort of thing.
All right, so I'm saying maybe we should get a recommendation between Britta and Lynn, communications and legal. We can get some sort of recommendation for some options. I'm going to come back to Ryan for the rest. And
After all of that.
Wait, there's more?
Yeah, well, no, I just, that was basically it, and then I just wanted to say thanks to everybody who was involved in organizing our annual Memorial Day ceremony last Wednesday. It was very, very nice. The speaker was really good. All of the staff and all of the volunteers who participated in that, and all the people who showed up to pay their respects to those who made the ultimate sacrifice for our country. And then similarly, I wanted to thank the Rotary Club and everybody who was involved with the Flags for Our Heroes event, which was really a beautiful display of hundreds of American flags at Borough Park, which is also done by the community and with some help from the city, led by a few different Rotary clubs in our community. A nice tribute as well. So that's it. That's all I had this evening. Thank you.
As we go on to Neil, I don't know if anybody's paying attention to the cap score, but should I not say it? Is
No, say it.
You should not.
It's 3-0.
3-0 caps right now.
I can all get behind that. All right, that's good.
Okay, go on to Neil.
On that one. Okay, so just one last note on the flags for our
Heroes.
Yes.
event is that each of those flags represents a donation in memory of some fallen veterans. So I thought it was very moving that there are so many flags on display, and it's really a beautiful display. I know we talked a lot about schools, and I'll save any remarks on this specific case for later on, but I was at an event this morning, the annual meeting of the Committee for Montgomery, which is a group of civic and business and nonprofit leaders whose charter is to advocate for our county and our county's needs at the state level. The speaker this morning was Ann Kaiser, state delegate, who's the chair of the Ways and Means Committee in the House of Delegates, which means they've got the money. And there's a commission focusing on the needs of the public schools, particularly in Montgomery County, but statewide. There is a constitutional amendment going on the ballot this fall to dedicate the casino tax revenues and a lockbox for increasing school revenues above and beyond what would normally be given. So there's something like $500 million that would be a year being made available to public schools statewide, a good chunk of which would come our way to Montgomery County. And let me tell you, I've done some of the arithmetic on school capacity in this county, and we're somewhere between $1 billion and $2 billion in the hole in terms of how much money it would take to get us enough capacity to handle all the students that we have and the growth of the schools. So it's important work. They're looking at not just funding for schools, but also ways to improve the way schools are operated and the way teachers and curricula and the way the whole thing is managed. So they're doing really good work. There's a whole commission working on this stuff. It's a multi-year project, and I was very happy to see that presentation. It gave me some hope that things are going to get better as we go forward. I'll leave it at that. I do have a formal announcement to make. A closed meeting was held at City Hall by the Mayor and City Council on Monday, May 21st, 2018 at approximately 10:58 p.m. pursuant to a motion adopted unanimously. The meeting was proposed to be closed pursuant to General Provisions Article of the Annotated Code of Maryland, Sections 3-305B8, consult with staff, consultants, or other individuals about pending or potential litigation, and 3-305B1I, the appointment, employment, assignment, promotion, discipline, demotion, compensation, removal, resignation, or performance evaluation of appointees, employees, or officials over whom it has jurisdiction. The topic discussed were potential litigation regarding the city's MS4 stormwater permit and a personnel matter to conduct the city manager's annual performance evaluation. Present at the meeting were Mayor Ashman, Council members Harris, Sales, Sesma, Spiegel, and Wu. City staff present were City Attorney Board, City Manager Tomasello, Deputy City Manager Enslinger, and Assistant City Attorney Johnson. Tomasello, Enslinger, and Johnson left at 11:06 p.m. Upon the conclusion of the discussion, the closed meeting was adjourned at approximately 11:36 p.m. Whoa. That was exciting, wasn't it? All right, that's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. So as I was mentioning, I just wanted to thank all of the Kelly Park advocates on both sides for coming in and sharing their testimony, their passionate testimony. I know they're all very concerned, and we've been working on this issue. It'll continue to be a work in progress, so I'm hoping that everyone stays engaged in the process, regardless of the decision that we arrive at this evening. You know, my entree into city government was when the smoking ordinance came up, and my first time testifying on the smoking ordinance, and I wasn't sure where it was going to go. We had lots of people opposing a ban and saying it's infringing on people's rights, so we look forward to working with the city, not only the city, the Board of Ed, and definitely the residents, and making sure that they're included during the remaining decision making. So my colleagues already mentioned the Memorial Day observance. That was with the flags, for the flag ceremony, and then the official Memorial Day observance we had at Chrisman Park. I had the responsibility of thanking a veteran and also recognizing the resources and support we have in the city for our veterans in the city of Gaithersburg. We also celebrated our coaches who volunteer every day during after-school programs on the weekends to teach a wide range of sport activities. We did that at the Bower Park. And if you haven't had a chance yet, the weather hopefully will be better so you can enjoy the miniature golf course. It was recently updated, and it was nice to hit a few before the weather forced us to go inside. We also welcomed, along with the Gaithersburg Germantown Chamber of Commerce and Tom Lonergan and a few planning and committee members, we welcomed and celebrated Gaithersburg's newest apartment complex. It's near Rio, the Camden Washingtonian, and it still has our 15% of affordable housing set aside. So we're happy when, you know, we can always increase the amount of housing we have, especially our affordable housing availability. As the mayor mentioned, it was the mayor, me, and Mike attended the Washington Grove Elementary School's 125th anniversary celebration. They had a really cute presentation where they did a look back in time, and They've gone through so many different changes. There were students, past students, alumni, former teachers were there. We had a student who actually gave a presentation. She's now an instructor at the school. So it's just a testament of how welcoming and inviting Gaithersburg continues to be, no matter how much we grow. We also celebrated the anniversary of another small business, 40th anniversary of the Chicken Basket in Old Town. It's always good to see our businesses that are thriving, and although we have a very small and limited stock on the east side, those that have survived the test of time, it's important to celebrate those milestones. And Senior Advisory Committee, which I'm a liaison to, we started our strategic planning, and we will start the planning for the Active Aging Expo as well as our annual event. Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments is celebrating Chesapeake Bay Awareness Week. It started June 2nd through June 10th. So the Muddy Branch Alliance, the Muddy Branch is the city's only watershed. If you haven't had a chance to visit or check them out, please do so this week and take a selfie with the Muddy Branch and your local watershed to celebrate the benefits and importance of our Chesapeake Bay. This weekend was Wear Orange Weekend in support of fighting gun violence. So we I wore orange to a few of our events to ensure that people just remain aware of the ongoing challenges we face with gun violence and helping keep our students safe and protecting them. And yeah, I look forward to the discussion on Kelly Park and seeing what our options are.
Thank you. Mike?
Not much to add. Just want to thank you all for being here. I think it's important to remember that a couple of us have been through the PTA, MCC, PTA, MCPS wars. Judd and I got our start. One of the reasons that we actually decided to run for office back in 2005 was because of school crowding issues, school capacity issues, and educational infrastructure. I think the most important thing to remember is our decision tonight will be a decision that's in the best interest of our students, our young people, and the families that raise them. Having a secure school community, one that you value, is important to your quality of life. I think that's the most important thing to remember. That's what's been important to me as well, working from up here as well as being a citizen. So again, thank you for all of that, and I'll just leave it at that.
Rob?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. In the hopes of increasing the likelihood that you guys will stick around, I am going to defer any comments till later so we can move on.
Okay, thank you. So as I mentioned, next week we will not have a work session because we're going to be off at our convention for Maryland Municipal League. So the next regular meeting of the Mayor and Council will be right here Monday, June 18th at City Hall, and we will move on to From the City Manager.
Thanks, Mayor. I think I give a consolidated city manager economic development update.
Please.
I know it's, as I mentioned 2 weeks ago, it's flown a little bit under the radar, but we're also up for adopting the budget tonight and the strategic plan. As I always do, I want to thank all the dozens and dozens of employees that work on that. It's a really, very, very well done document this year, and we've made a lot of improvements, and so I look forward to getting that done. And economic development, Tom is in Boston, representing the city at the Biotechnology Industry Organization Conference of Pharmaceutical and Biotech Firms. He's sharing a booth with Rockville. They've actually done joint marketing materials, which was interesting, considering we're pretty strenuous competitors most of the time, but no one from Europe and Asia that shows there knows that. So it is an interesting move forward, I think.
Yeah, very nice. Okay. Thank you, Tony. We will move on to the next item, which is ordinances, resolutions, and regulations, and we will I'll invite Deputy City Manager Dennis Enslinger to the podium and talk about adopting our strategic plan.
Mayor and City Council members, tonight we're asking you to approve a resolution which would adopt the 2019 strategic plan. Just to give everybody a little bit of background as a reminder, Council actually reviewed a prior draft of this plan at their February 26th planning retreat. We have made the changes suggested by Council during that meeting, and they're reflected in the draft. I will note we also made a few minor other changes that I wanted to bring to your attention. One of them is under environment. We had one of the action items as being stormwater standard policy document would be developed and then be reviewed and approved by the mayor and council for adoption. We've actually revised that based upon the flexibility that we might need regarding that document. So we placed some standards and policy guidelines on the web that will be reflective of whatever is relevant at that particular point in time. So we won't be bringing those to you for formal adoption. They're really kind of retro or regurgitation of information that we received from the state. And so those could change on a basis depending on what the permit says. So we made that slight modification. And then there was really a cleanup. A couple of years ago, we actually made a change to infrastructure and facilities, which was to complete the Arts Barn facility needs assessment. Really, that should have been the Kentlands Mansion, which you've actually completed that facility needs assessment. So those are two revisions that we didn't talk about during the February 26th. We're asking you to approve the resolution adopting the 2019 strategic plan.
I'll reiterate Tony's thanks not only for the budget, but for all the work that's gone into the drafting the strategic plan, which I think does reflect the priorities of the council very well, and interested to hear what everyone thinks.
Well, as I said in the session when we were reviewing the document, I mean, each year it gets stronger and stronger in terms of providing data to not just to talk about what we're doing and what we want to do, but on measuring what's gone on before. I think that's very important, and often in government organizations you don't see that. So I think it's really great, and hopefully you in the audience and you out in TV land have had a chance to look through it. It's, you know, there's a lot here, and you can easily skip sections that you're not interested in, but there's a lot of really good information. So I'd like to move the resolution if it's okay to do that now.
I'll second that, because you basically said what I was going to say about the strategic plan. It's getting tighter.
Don't you hate when I
every
do
year.
that?
Well, I don't hate it.
Okay.
You know, you actually said it probably better than I would have. So.
And I'll vote for it because it's an excellent piece of work. It's a great document.
Anyone else want to make a statement before we go to the vote?
Let's just vote.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries 5-0. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we will move on to our fee schedule. I will invite Stephanie Walker, our Director of Finance Administration, to lead us in this.
Thank you. This is the resolution to adopt the fee schedule. The proposed fee schedule, along with a summary of requested changes, were provided with the proposed budget document in early April. There are two requested changes since the proposed fee schedule. The first was detailed in the agenda packet and is a request to increase the fine for health and sanitation from $200 to $500 to better match the severity of that crime. The second change is not included in the agenda packet, and I apologize for the confusion with that. When creating a new rate category for general admission fees at the water park for the county non-resident outside of county, for the hut and pool pass fees and advanced group fees, the non-resident out-of-county rate was missed in that. These fees can be found on page 240 of the agenda packet. The putt and pool pass weekday rate for non-resident out-of-county should actually be $17 rather than $13.50. The putt and pool pass weekend rate should be $25. The advanced group rate pool only should be $13 for weekdays, $20 for weekends, and the advanced group rate for putt and pool should be $15 for weekdays and $23 for weekends. I apologize for
Thank
that.
you for that clarification.
So we have three categories of folks that we price to for the activity center facilities now, right?
Correct.
We
There's
have residents of the city. We have people who are not residents of the city but residents of the county, and then we have people who are not residents of either.
Correct. And this will mirror then the resolution that was done earlier this year before the the pool open. So we just missed updating it within the proposed fee schedule
Okay.
that accompanied the budget.
Are there any additional changes from what was proposed previously?
Not on the fee schedule.
I appreciate the way you've, the way staff has organized the changes in the fee schedule this year. It was much easier to find
I
it
agree.
and understand it, so thanks very much for that. And I guess with that, I'll move the resolution for the fee schedule.
I'll second it.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, carries 5-0. Thank you very much. And I think you're staying up here. Stephanie, lead us in the budget.
I'd try to leave, but someone would probably stop me. The second item is the ordinance that would adopt the FY19 budget as well as the property tax rate. The city held a public hearing on this ordinance on April 16th. The proposed ordinance includes a tax rate that will remain the same as it has been since 2011. There were a number of changes from the budget that was proposed at the budget workshop. These amendments are summarized in the agenda packet in an attachment titled Subsequent Changes, or Subsequent Amendments, excuse me. This resulted in a reduction of $150,183 in expenditures and an accompanying reduction in revenues. The majority of these changes related to personnel changes that occurred after the initial data was pulled in January, so primarily employee resignations. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have on the ordinance, on any of the subsequent changes, or on the voluminous budget document itself.
Again, let
Need
me
be.
start by reiterating Tony's appreciation for you and for all staff, because it's such a big exercise that we have to do each year, and you guys, year after year, are doing a great job. And it's kind of odd to be in this situation where we have this big issue with Kelly Park, and it's overshadowing the budget, which is literally like the biggest thing that we do all year. So I just want to thank all staff.
Yeah, it's an easy vote today simply because of the work that staff has put into this, and including the work session where you methodically walked us through each and every element. So with that, I'll move the resolution.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion, or do we want to, you guys ready to vote?
Just echo what's been said.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries 5-0. Congratulations, thank you all very much.
Passed unanimously, that's good.
Yep.
Usually does.
All right, we have a
All the hard
budget.
work was done beforehand.
Yes.
Okay. Just get my. Next, we have John Schlichting, our Director of Planning and Code Administration, to talk about closing the record at a certain date for the Sol Center project in Kellens.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. I'm here to ask for a motion to close your record on the schematic development plan for the Kentland Square infill sites. As you will recall, a motion to approve this plan during your second policy discussion on April 16th failed. Also that night, the applicant requested that you reopen your record so that they could resubmit, and you voted to open your record indefinitely. The applicant has resubmitted a new plan, and the Planning Commission will make its recommendation to you this coming Wednesday. Tonight, I'm requesting that you vote to close the record on SDP 7712-2017 at 5 p.m. on June 22nd, 2018. I am happy to answer any questions.
And at some point, we'll receive whatever amendments to the plan, some sort of schematics or what the details of what the new proposal will be.
Yes, before your record closes. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Great.
And are we communicating to the community that the record is about to be closed and that something new has been received so that they can review it and tell us what they don't like about it?
Yes, as we are legally required, yes.
All right, thanks.
So the new plans will go online after the Planning Commission meeting?
I believe they're online now
Already,
because
okay.
of the Planning Commission meeting, which is this coming Wednesday, yes.
Okay.
That's just not unusual that we close the record without actually seeing it as part of the package, so that's,
But we're not closing the record today.
we're not closing the
Yeah.
record today, we're voting to close the record, but even so, it seems unusual to do that
Premature.
before we actually see what's in the package.
Just send us an email with the new details.
Sure.
That'll suffice, because the record's not closing until, if you guys pass it this way, it's not closing until June 22nd.
Right.
So speaking of that, staff recommends that the that we hold the record open until 5 p.m. June 22nd with anticipated policy discussion on July 16th. What's the pleasure of the council?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, carries 5-0.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, the moment everyone's been waiting for, let's have our presentation from City Manager Tony Tomasello on Kelly Park.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Thanks for everyone's patience. We are here tonight to receive staff guidance on the Montgomery County Public Schools Kelly Park site proposal. This is a brief look at the agenda. We're going to talk about kind of where this came from as a legislative priority, the background on the project itself, the MCPS search and proposal, the key issues that have kind of surfaced from time consistently, some potential park modifications, and then the staff recommendation and the justifications behind the recommendation. We start with the legislative priority. This is taken directly from our adopted City of Gaithersburg state legislative priorities for 2018. So we believe that similar statements have been included in all previous years in recent memory. I would highlight in the first paragraph that larger class sizes, a heavier reliance on portables, leaking windows and roofs, and playgrounds with severe erosion were specifically called out, and that the Gaithersburg cluster specifically was used as an example, and that we end this with saying that we cannot afford any additional delay. So this is where we started the process after MCPS reached out to us, is how this could possibly be a match. The background on Kelly Park itself, it was developed in the 1980s. It is not attached to any particular neighborhood. It is surrounded by Saybrook, Audubon Square, and some other smaller communities are actually contiguous to it. But it is a large city park, one of our larger city parks, as a matter of fact. It has 3 ball fields, playgrounds, tennis courts, a sand volleyball court, and obviously open space. The school site would require a net 3 to 4 acres to come from the park. The park itself hosts a mix of informal, which is informal play, and program uses where we program or people that we have leased space to, like the Gaithersburg Giants, utilize the park on a more formal basis. Some program open space funds were used. These were mostly for improvements, mainly for the light stanchions that you see. We have not found any restrictions to date relating to the program open space funding or any sort of restrictive covenants. We continue to look. And if we find any, we'll let you know to see if they can be modified or if they will prevail. We have, as we do in all of our large parks, we regularly invest in capital funds in this park to maintain it, but most of those improvements would remain or would be improved. The search committee itself was convened in 2017 by MCPS. It contained government representatives from the public school system, from Montgomery County government, from Park and Planning, from the City of Gaithersburg, myself and Monica Marquina, Montgomery Village, and Washington Grove, and there were additional representatives to each from the Montgomery County Council of PTAs and the NAACP. The general criteria were location within the Gaithersburg High School cluster. They were looking at obviously acreage and topography that suited a school. They needed access, and they preferred existing utilities, as all expensive developments do. They were looking for a site that was in good physical condition, that was available soon, and obviously cost was a factor. 14 sites were originally identified, 5 were eliminated and determined not to be feasible, and the remaining 9 sites were analyzed individually. Montgomery County Public Schools has a formal position that co-location of facilities offers certain advantages. Obviously, there's more sites available when you look to co-locate, so scarce sites are expanded. Interestingly to me, I wasn't really following it from this angle, but the common parking lot makes for better stormwater management. The school using the lot in the daytime and the public using the lot when the school's not in session just results in less impervious surface. And we consider that to be a good match with some of our environmental policies as well. And obviously there's opportunities for shared programming in the interior areas. The site selection committee collectively chose Kelly Park as the recommended site. Not everyone voted as the top site, but it was collectively the top choice. WSSC was the first alternative, but I will tell you, as someone who's worked in economic development in the city for a long time, redeveloping an industrial site, a truly industrial site, is a tall order. It certainly doesn't match the fast track option. You're not sure what's in the ground. You're not sure what the timing is of WSSC actually leaving. So yes, it was a nice square site that was on some busy roads, but it would have been a tall order to turn this around in any sort of a fast track fashion. And it's still possible that there would be challenges in the ground. So just so everyone's on the same page, I'm sure they already are, but the proposal itself is the location of a new elementary school on a portion of Kelly Park. It's intended to provide capacity capable of reducing overcrowding at 5 existing cluster schools. It utilizes the same model that we use at Lakelands Park, though we hope that we could improve that as well, from using what we've learned at Lakelands Park to transfer over to this farm. And it would be a fast track project. I believe one of the speakers said that pretty much every other cluster in the county would love to have a school in the next 3 or 4 years, and that's what this would be. There's been a lot of reaction to the preliminary concept. I would reiterate that it's just a concept. This was just a back of the napkin kind of study that an MCPS staffer had done. This is actually the second one that came out. It shows 3 fields. We have 3 fields now. It shows 3 fields after the school was built. The Kelly 2 does show on this concept as a rectangular field, though that is the majority of use now from our programming. Even though it's laid out as a softball field, we generally use it as a rectangular field, at least more so than as a softball field.
So Tony, for the benefit, sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
For the benefit of the public, can you just let everybody know what you're referring to when you say Kelly 2?
Kelly 2 is this round area, which is a softball pitch. It generally follows this curve. And this concept, which is, again, just a concept, shows it as a rectangular field, a soccer field, which is how we use it quite a bit now. So 3 fields now, 3 fields then.
A procedural question, Tony, if you could, and I'm sorry for interrupting the presentation. Could you talk to me as far as procedure? So say we vote to negotiate. Will we be presented different options for site layout that we would then evaluate, or will MCPS come back to us with one option that they think is the best one and then give a yay or nay, or how does that work?
I've been told that the feasibility consultant will come up with multiple options. Whether there is a recommended option or not, it depends on the situation.
And so the MCPS would have to come to us because they would have to have certain portions of the site conveyed to them depending on what the option is. I just want to make sure that I would like us to have options before us and be able to evaluate this, the bottom line.
So that appears to be the case now.
Okay.
I can clarify that as well. Okay. So we generally categorize the issues that come up repeatedly as the effect on park operations, the parking and traffic concerns, and the attendance boundary issue. So I'm just going to go through those briefly one at a time. So, effect on park operations. Daytime use during school hours is minimal. I mean, I've been out there hundreds of times, as have most of you. And I know you've all been out there in the daytime. During the school hours, it tends to be preschool play, little kids on the playground, or adult exercise. People walking around. Sometimes you see adults playing basketball, but it's fairly quiet during the day. It gets really busy. I actually had our neighborhood services park observer staff give me a recap, and they confirmed that after Borer Park and Lakelands Park, it's probably our busiest large park in evenings and weekends. One of the challenges would be that the perimeter of the school grounds themselves would need to be defined through the feasibility study and then negotiated, because MCPS security guidelines would limit access to school grounds during the day, which is reasonable and expected. But the remainder of the park would remain available during the school day and the full site at all other times. So I'm not sure that the actual use of the park would be affected that much. The one thing that we believe would be affected immediately would be the reconfiguration of Kelly 2 into a rectangular field, but as I mentioned, that's already the most common use. And we would get a redesigned field, a new field, possibly a turf field, which could be programmed quite a bit more than the grass field as well.
In the location of Kelly 2.
On the location of Kelly 2. It's all up for negotiation at the moment, but the ancillary uses could be impacted. I believe, my gut feeling is that a second playground would be needed immediately, because the school playground is used during the day for preschool play. So we probably have to put in another playground somewhere else in the park. And then we would leave that up to the designers to figure out how that would be. Other things could be relocated or even eliminated, but I see that as an opportunity as well. Up and coming sports, futsal, pickleball, they are on the rise, and tennis and outdoor volleyball are somewhat less so. So there could be some redesign and some new uses instituted in the park as well.
Whose cost burden?
Again, to be negotiated, but my
Negotiated.
expectation is MCPS would bear most of the cost of that. But if we want something premium, we're in a position to make that happen, I believe. So parking and traffic. Starting with parking, there's currently just under 100 spaces on the site. I counted 96 just today. Some of them are wide, and sometimes people put 2 cars in them, and sometimes they do. So I'm giving them 100. The proposed increase is 160. And I have to say, we're all familiar with the neighborhood parking concerns when large events happen. Large baseball field crowds or weekend crowds, sometimes they park in the neighborhood. That would actually help parking during the large events. I think one challenge would be that we need some parking for daytime use as well. So we would either need a dedicated area of the lot or a few more spaces put in so that daytime use that somebody that had to drive to get to the park would have a place to park. Even though you can park on Victory Farm during the day, it still makes it a little bit of a hike with a stroller. And then a joint use agreement of the parking lot would reduce stormwater impacts, as I mentioned before, and capital costs, since it would be a jointly maintained field or simply maintained by MCPS. I have to say I was not going into this thinking about the stormwater impacts, but I find it really interesting now.
That's all right, I was thinking about it.
Well, thank you. So traffic. I know this is a hot button issue. It has been a hot button issue on Victory Farm for all kinds of reasons for a long time. The traffic study is part of MCPS's feasibility study, which includes environmental study, topographic, soil conditions, traffic, those types of things. But it is one of the elements of the MCPS feasibility study. But Victory Farm, it has normal volume and it has normal speeds. I've gone into detail with the Gaithersburg Police Department and with Public Works. It's a large road. It has speed bumps on it. I think we kind of do ourselves a disservice if we just focus on a single block here, because there's no additional trips being generated. It's just kids going to 6 schools versus 5. So a reasonable boundary, which I think we all intend to advocate for, could in fact reduce vehicular traffic counts overall, because it's like a knot that's being untied. And hopefully we would have the people that are driving from Saybrook to Gaithersburg Elementary would not be doing that anymore. We could actually see a reduction in traffic count at Victory Farm. But that needs to be worked out, but I'm optimistic that is the case. The math works out when you have this many kids just divided by 6 instead of divided by 5. So focusing on a radius presents real possibility of improvement. Anyone that tries to pick up and drop off at Gaithersburg Elementary, because it's so overcrowded, knows what a challenge that is. So this has the possibility of helping that.
So procedural question, Tony. Am I correct in my understanding that the vote to allow negotiations is the trigger for MCPS to commence their traffic study, environmental study, feasibility study, and those would be available prior to the final vote, yea or nay, to convey the property?
Yes.
Okay.
That is exactly correct. And finally, the attendance boundary issue. I mean, the MCPS has 4 basic evaluation criteria, which is utilization of the facility, how many seats it has available, the demographic characteristics, and the geographic proximity and the stability of boundaries over time. What they won't say is what the relative weight is of those 4 issues, because it changes. And you know, everyone knows that geographic proximity did not win out in the Forest Oak Middle School evaluation 20 years ago. I mean, I was here at the time, and I remember those contentious meetings. It's generally done 12 months out. The Board of Education has agreed to 18 months out in this case. They have made it clear that approval of the site cannot be conditioned on a specific boundary. And overriding their criteria, even if it was possible, could present us with other policy conflicts internal to us. For example, the desire to mix demographics within a single school is also one of our values. And I don't know that we want to artificially kind of override that by telling MCPS exactly what the boundary would be. All this contiguous areas may simply not be possible. There may be too many children right off the bat. But I think if we look at that all students benefit regardless, but in different ways. You're either going to go to a new school or you're going to go to a less crowded school. Everybody gets something in that scenario. The MCPS board resolution endorsing this site already contains walking language, which I've put here. Whereas the site is centrally located with a sidewalk system that connects surrounding neighborhoods, which promotes walkability to the school. Whether we can get the Board of Ed to go a little further on that is something that we could explore, but it's interesting that they determined that this was appropriate for this resolution.
That language is not typical, is my understanding, for these kinds of resolutions, right?
That is my understanding as well, though I have not personally looked at other resolutions. I don't recall it before. It does seem like something that should be in every resolution, but I'm not sure that it is. And some sites just aren't walkable, period, so maybe those do not.
I'm sorry.
I'll finish the page.
Yep.
Obviously, we would commit to advocacy for a reasonable boundary. And, you know, our lobbying skills have increased tremendously in the last 20 years, and I'm really optimistic here. First of all, the current demographic mix around this site already, to me, represents a perfect mixture of demographic characteristics. And we could request that the Forest Oak Middle School be reviewed at the same time. I don't know what the possibility of success is that, but if they're going to do it, it seemed like they would be doing it now.
Yeah, so, sorry, Tony, the walkability of the school is important to me. I think it's important to many segments of the community surrounding it. And so during negotiations, I would just want to keep on the table the ability to obtain as much confidence that we can from MCPS that the local community, some portion of the local community would be attending this school, and we wouldn't be busing folks in from elsewhere. So, and I think we talked, I had some conversations with some Board of Ed members, and my understanding is that there was outreach to the superintendent, and that discussion led to further discussion of a resolution that would solidify MCPS's efforts to make this a walkable, community-oriented school. Would I like to go further? Yes, but I think the very fact that that was a quick confirmation, I think it means that we can talk about this during negotiations just to get the level of confidence as much as we can.
As much as we can.
Go ahead, Tony.
So I actually have a point related to the demographic mix, just real quickly. I think it's clear that reassigning students is gonna affect the demographics at the other schools. And that may come into the mix here too. So
Could.
we have to be prepared for that. But, you know, several of those schools are Gaithersburg schools too, so we have to.
It's true. And it just seems so logical to say, you know, surrounding the school, you know, they should just go to the school, but it's quite a bit more complicated behind the scenes. I don't envy MCPS having to make those calls. And redistricting is always difficult. I mean, people never want to be redistricted, even to newer, you know, less crowded schools, as we've seen ourselves.
I think we need to emphasize that last point during negotiations as well. With
Go ahead,
respect to
Tony.
first
We got it. Go ahead.
So, just a partial list of potential park modifications. We're obviously still open to suggestions, and I believe we should require the feasibility consultant to hold a public meeting. I know there's been some talk of a committee, but I think having the consultants themselves hear from not just a select few people, but the entire community that wants to come out and give input is probably something that would work, and that MCPS and their consultants would be open to, and they're probably pretty skillful in doing. But these, we had talked about some proffers, potentially. First, the most obvious being replacement land. Whether MCPS has some other open space. We know that the Woodward School site does not seem conducive to being a school, according to MCPS. So what's it going to be? You know, so we could potentially take control of that or annex it into the city. We're interested in determining whether Kelly 2, the rectangular field, could be turf, since that, but it would need to be our turf. You know, it would need to be done to our level with our organic fill. That, you know, preschoolers and kindergartners can play on, but as we've shown, you know, they're really popular fields. They keep level really well. You don't have to cut them. You don't have to water them. So that's certainly an attractive proffer. Playground upgrades has been mentioned, both to the school and the park seem to be in play. We pay a good bit of money for community use of schools for our camps and for other programs. This would make an ideal, I believe, potential summer campsite and other, you know, basketball site or something like that. I believe that we should be able to do, to get discounted or free use of the school, whether that's for a limited term or in perpetuity, I'm not sure, but this would be an ideal space. We do not have as many campsites on the east side of 355 as we do on the west, and we would love to have a new one, certainly. And then the infrastructure itself, we think the pathway system could be upgraded. It potentially could be lighted for egress for when the lights go out, like after games. We do not light the park at night, but perhaps some pathway lighting would be good. New pathways themselves would be good. I mentioned next generation amenities. You know, it's possible that tennis courts could go for a different type of court. The bleachers at the fields, especially Kelly 1 and Kelly 3, it's just about time to have them upgraded. And, you know, if we're going to have a fresh new field, it might be a good thing to do. MCPS is able to do those probably a little more cheaply than we're able to do them. New fencing will probably be required. So those types of things that, this is only a partial list, but those are the types of things that we're thinking about. There are other kind of procedural proffers, like leaving the park open as much as possible during construction, talking about, you know, trying to get, those aren't physical proffers, but those are more procedural things that we would be thinking about as well. So, not surprisingly, our recommendation is to be authorized to negotiate a draft agreement with MCPS for use of a portion of the park. It doesn't promise anybody anything. It really will have to come back with some options for you all to evaluate, sometimes at a later date. But authorization enables them to get going with the feasibility analysis, which has the traffic study, environmental, and geotech. And then that may result in multiple options. I'm expecting it to result in multiple options there, but really, There's just one way to find out whether this is gonna work. I mean, we have to do a feasibility analysis, and MCPS has to have some confidence that we're willing to negotiate in good faith, because this is a $100,000 study. And it's taxpayer funded. They don't wanna waste money any more than anybody else. So this would help them get there. The justifications, which I've been over most of these, but really, if you boil it down, the benefits of school overcrowding relief outweigh the potential drawbacks. This is where we started with our policy. To put a new school in existing neighborhoods is just extremely difficult, and there's going to be some inconvenience to somebody. The matter is, whether those inconveniences outweigh the potential relief that we're going to get from school overcrowding. It's been our top priority for decades, and this is another opportunity for us to be a player. Potential park disruption is to a limited area and is expected to be minimal during school hours. And then when school's out, the whole park's open. So that's as minimal as it can get. Victory Farm is a collector road that can accommodate additional peak hour volume. I don't think it's going to be much peak hour volume, frankly. And if the boundary's drawn correctly, you won't even have that many buses. So this could be a real possibility of real improved traffic in Old Town because no new trips are being generated. Continuing that, it builds on our role as an active partner because we have overcrowding all over the city. And to be known as an active partner is important. We know that from our other legislative outreach in other areas. And as I've mentioned a couple of times now, all students are going to benefit from this. New school, less crowded school are still a benefit. And some of the city's most diverse and economically challenged neighborhoods are right around this site. Not all of them, but some. Shared use is environmentally friendly and maximizes utility of scarce sites. We talked about the stormwater and also the fact that we would like to reduce impervious surface versus adding it to our inventory in the city. And, selfishly, it's our opportunity to comprehensively upgrade and modernize the amenities of the park all at the same time. You wouldn't be just getting a new school, you'd be getting a new park at the same time, which is an attractive proposition for us. So those are our justifications, and that's our recommendation.
Thank you, Tony. I'm going to start here, and I'm not going to go on too long because I don't have a vote, but I do have opinions. First off, Tony has done an admirable job in painting the landscape, and really appreciate you putting it out there so thoroughly. And again, we greatly appreciate all the public input. As Ryan said, we weigh all the public input. All of the incentives are for us to weigh all of the public input, and that's what we do. And I salute our residents who have felt very, very passionately on both sides for conducting our public debates, largely in a very civil and respectful manner. That's what I feel like the Gaithersburg way is. I'm often asked, I speak at schools a lot, and the kids ask me, what's the toughest part of being mayor? Toughest part of being mayor is when you have situations that legitimately have competing priorities. There are legitimate competing priorities here. Overcrowding of schools it's taking a large toll on 4 schools that serve city residents. And Kelly Park is a wonderful amenity that serves a large number of residents. I've been to Kelly Park many times. My kids played sports at Kelly Park. Just out of due diligence, I spent Thursday, May 24th, several times going during the school day at Kelly Park myself, just to get a feel, lay of the land during school hours. I love it. It's a gorgeous park. It's a great amenity. And as I believe everybody understands, MCPS has its own process. We did not choose the site or any of the sites that they looked at. So on the one side, we have people who've invested in this area and near this great amenity, and all of a sudden, a piece of that amenity is on the table to be taken away to serve another public purpose. And what do they get out of it? Particularly if they don't have young children. What are they getting out of this? I totally get that resistance. And there's another element that I see. I'm not thrilled about the precedent.
it's MCPS's responsibility to secure the real estate to house the schools they need to give our kids the high quality education that we demand. And relying on municipal parkland to compensate for the lack of oversight in acquiring the land that they needed ahead of time is not a viable model. I don't like the model. So I'm recognizing all of this. At the same time, we do have before us a rare opportunity. We have a demonstrable, real problem of overcrowding at 4 schools, and the fact is that the Gaithersburg cluster has not introduced a new elementary school in 30 years. 30 years since the last time there's been a new Gaithersburg cluster elementary school. Now we have a chance not only to make a large dent in the problem that's affecting kids all over our city, but MCPS is willing to build something on an expedited schedule. And again, while Kelly Park wouldn't be my first choice, I've spent the better part of the last 2 decades, along with Mike and others, as an advocate to MCPS, and I understand how rare this opportunity is and how in demand new school facilities are throughout the county and how limited the funding is and the money is and the opportunities are. So I can't in good faith just say no to it. In fact, I think we really have an obligation to explore this, and so my inclination is find a way for us to get to yes. And I'm thinking that if we can, as Tony has laid out in terms of proffers and what we're negotiating for on the table, if we can make that dent in school overcrowding and minimize the footprint of a new school and maintain the current uses of the park, perhaps even enhance certain things in the park, new ball field, whether it's turf. If it's turf, it could be used year-round. If we can get some additional playground facilities, some playground facilities that can be used even during school hours. There's the added benefit of potential additional security for the neighborhood, given that MCPS has cameras on their facilities. There's a potentially additional parking that Tony brought up. I think there's potential to get to yes. I agree with Tony that MCPS is not going to commit to boundaries before they go through their boundary study process. But Rob brings up some good points about what sort of to keep on the table and to get as close to that as we can get. But I'm telling you, as I've committed to this community before, and I remain committed, if we go forward with this, I will be an advocate for drawing rational boundaries so that our neighborhood kids and maximize the walkers. So I commit to doing that. Possible other benefits in the offing, if Tony's right, and it does make sort of logical sense to me, there's a potential positive impact to traffic if we have more walkers than we had before. And further speculation that we could potentially revisit the boundary for Forest Oak Middle School and right a wrong from 20 years ago, I think that would be a potential great win for us. I spoke to 3 real estate professionals over the last couple months. One of whom, Mike Aubrey, is a regular on HDTV and the Today Show, and they were, as he loves to remind us, they were unanimous that if MCPS builds a new school near a neighborhood and the neighbors are zoned to attend it, it will have a positive impact on home values. And regarding the potential for, as some of you have referenced during testimony and I've heard in recent days, regarding potential for changing the site from Kelly Park to a site adjacent to Forest Oak Middle School, I don't know what the viability of such a site would be, so I would reserve judgment on that. And as a city, we're not in a position to force MCPS to consider one site or another, but I certainly would have no problem if during this process MCPS did an evaluation of that site, and as long as it doesn't hold up the open date for a potential new school. But ultimately, I think it's our responsibility to the city as a whole. The right thing to do is to authorize Tony to negotiate. Who wants to go next?
I'll go next because it's going to be pretty easy. I won't have much to add. I agree with everything the mayor just very eloquently said, including that last part about maybe exploring in the discussion that alternate site if it makes sense without holding up the progress. I did want to just add a couple other quick things. First, it was brought to my attention that the resolution passed by the school board not only calls for an earlier boundary study process, but it actually explicitly says that before the boundary study process starts, there should be a review of the utilization not only of the elementary schools in the cluster, but specifically calls out a review of the middle schools in the cluster as well. So that could be the hook to start the discussion about righting that wrong from 20 years ago. So I just wanted to point that out to Tony. It is in the resolution. It's the second to last resolved clause in the resolution from the school board. The mayor mentioned that he spent a bunch of time a couple Thursdays ago. I actually spent a bunch of time at the park the day before that, a couple Wednesdays ago, incognito, just kind of walking around, getting a feel for it. There are certain times a day, at least anecdotally for that field research, where the park is fairly well used, but I wouldn't say crowded. And in my experience there, the busy time was in the evening of a beautiful weekday evening, after school, after work. The playground was well utilized by about two dozen young children with about a dozen parents. I went to try to speak with many of them about what was going on and what's been proposed for the park, and to be quite honest, very few of them spoke English. I saw a Little League game going on at I think Kelly 2, but it might have been Kelly 1, but I always get the numbers confused. It was a Little League game with a handful of parents. But other than that, and the playground, there really wasn't much activity going on a beautiful sunny weekday evening. But it was being used. I don't want to give the impression that I believe that there was nothing going on there. I wanted to ask Tony, and you may not know this yet. This may be something for the discussion with MCPS. When we talk about the boundary of the school site itself, assuming we move forward here, as a subset within the park site, do we have a sense of what the width of the boundary would be around the footprint of a school building? In other words, we say, that portion may not be available during the day. What are we talking about?
We are if we can get this on the monitor, we would be following the outline mostly of most of the
solid white line, is that?
No. That's just one of the partial lines.
Okay.
It would hug the school to the south. I'm not actually sure about the parking lot.
Okay.
Like I said, I imagine parking is reserved for school employees during the day, but there's going to have to be some parking for park use as well. So how they're going to separate that, I'm not really sure. But it would not be, it would not be on our fields.
Okay.
Kind of the wild card is the field itself, the Kelly 2 field, the rectangular field. If it's going to be used for PE and recess at the elementary school level, it's probably off limits all day.
Okay, but whether that is true or not, there's no indication that the two other ball fields would be in any way part of that footprint.
No,
they
lower
seem
area
pretty
down
far away
here,
from the
Kelly 1,
concept.
Kelly 3.
Right.
And of course, we would probably have other playground amenities and things in that.
So just as you, if assuming, let's assume for a moment that you're given authorization to negotiate. For me, that would be an important thing to understand sort of in detail where the footprint of the school is such that security prohibits members of the public from being on certain parts of the property. I want a very clear understanding of where people can go during the day and where they can't. And obviously we want to minimize where they can't go while still adhering to the security requirements that MCPS has. To that end, I'm also concerned, and I realize this is just a preliminary concept, it could look totally different by the time you're done negotiating. It's important to me that there be clear connectivity basically from Victory Farm Drive into the park, because there's this concern that the school building itself is almost sort of like a buffer or a wall from the community surrounding the park into the park. And there are some back paths, I know, behind some of the houses on sort of the right side of this aerial, but for the other communities, I want to make sure that we don't get a sense that there ends up being sort of a blockade for access into the park. That's important to me as well. So in terms of connectivity, I just wanted to raise that also.
I would say the left turn movement out of Belle Grove as well is something that will need to be, especially for peak hour. I mean, drop off is 20, 30 minutes in the morning, but it can be difficult. You may see a four-way stop there.
Okay.
But that's not unusual for traffic calming to begin with.
All right, and then I just wanted to make a final point. Your presentation was very thorough, appreciated, and I imagine that if we move forward, the primary issues to discuss and negotiate will be the ones outlined in your presentation. But in no way is your presentation, does it limit what can be discussed during negotiations with MCPS? I mean, what people are willing to negotiate is a different question, but I want the public to understand that we haven't tied our hands in any way going into this. If we do decide to negotiate, we can talk about a whole variety of things that may or may not have come up specifically in your presentation.
We can. And an elementary school is about a $30 million project. I mean, the sum total of everything that I've described in the park, is a rounding error on a $30 million project. And if they move into the stream valley, they're going to pay a lot more. So everything's on the table, but until we see what's feasible, keeping in mind that we're hoping that it is feasible, we really don't know.
All right,
So there's no point in limiting what we can talk about until we know what they intend to do.
I'm just gonna move down the line. Neil?
So as long as there's no limit, I have my wish list here that I'd like to focus on, and what kinds of things that would really be important to improving this. One, as Ryan said, I think minimizing the area that's off limits during school hours would be important, particularly certain areas like the walking paths. We want people to be able to walk on the paths at any hour. That's what adults use for exercise during the daytime. I think that would be important. It occurred to me just now while looking at this picture that sight lines might be improved if the building was rotated 90 degrees so that it didn't block the view from everybody in the neighborhood of the entire park, but you could see around it if it would turn sideways. So if that's feasible, that's a minor point, but given that Metamucil now has blocked my sight lines from my house by building big buildings, I'm a little more aware of the impact that would have. You talked about something that we had discussed offline about potentially adding some additional green space, and I think that's very helpful if we're going to lose some green space, and I think it will be relatively small if it's just limited to the footprint of the building itself, but if we can get extra green space, that would be great. Minimizing the disruption during construction would also be important. So not only the footprint of what's off limits during school hours, but what the footprint of the construction area is likely to be larger than that, and making sure that the disruption to the community is both limited in land area and time frame. I don't know how long it takes to build one of these. I've heard anywhere between 1 year and 2 years.
I hear 2.
2 years?
Yeah, it just took Brown Station 2 years.
Can they work faster? But
It's pretty fast.
and during that time period, if that were to occur, moving some of the amenities that would be lost to perhaps across Victory Farm, or there's a little plot of land that could be used for some stuff anyway, I think would be helpful as well. So we talked about redistricting already, maximizing the use and access points. Yeah, and parking, whatever we can do to make parking work better. Oh, and one other thing that we had chatted about earlier is there was some discussion about traffic patterns and potentially adding some new roadways. And I don't know if this would be helpful or not, and I don't know if the community would like it or not, but there was once upon a time a plan to connect Victory Farm to, what was the road?
Brooks.
No, to Brook.
Yeah.
Brooks.
It's
And,
the upper lot of Gaithersburg Elementary School. The new teacher lot is actually that right of way.
Right, so but it belongs to MCPS, who's the other party at the table. So there's some money that the county is sitting on transportation funding that we would like to pry loose. So if that would be helpful, I think this would be an opportune time to get that on the table and help traffic So apparently somebody in the neighborhood likes that idea, so. You know, connectivity, I mean, as somebody that's been involved in, you know, trying to figure out transportation, connectivity and options, different ways in and out are important, so might be a good time to revisit that. I guess the other option of connecting Odin Hall is off the table because there's now a neighborhood in the way.
Yes, Hidden Creek is in the middle, but I think about 10 years ago, we used to own the upper teacher's lot, Gaithersburg, and we traded it.
And we traded it for teachers.
For the lot behind the Victor Litz lot, what I call it, because we'll never build that road, you know, you just never know.
Never say never.
Yeah.
Okay. You've already got the rest of the list, but in conversations with the various groups over the last couple of weeks, you know, I encouraged everybody to think of whatever other wish lists or amenities that they might have here. So hopefully during this process, assuming it goes forward, there will be time to get more creative and clever and useful ideas on the table here. This is, you know, I think we want this very badly. I think MCPS also wants to do this. So given that, it's a negotiating time where you can get stuff that you might not ordinarily be able to get. I mean, a boundary study would be the ultimate thing, but as we've discussed, I think that's the point where they probably draw the line, sadly. All right.
Lorianne.
All right, thank you, Mayor. So I have a few questions. Tony, thank you for the presentation. I know we gave you a lot of feedback on what to include, so I'm glad that you touched on a lot of the concerns that have been expressed over the past couple of weeks. So just to be clear, I know we've talked about shared use of spaces and where it's worked at different locations. Is it totally off the table? I know some of the residents had suggestions about Forest Oak Middle School and about using that as a shared space because of the amount of space. Is that totally off the table, or is that still a possibility?
I'm certainly happy to ask to see if that can be studied. I think it's important to
exhaust all options, or?
Yes, but I think it's also important to, so that people know and acknowledge that that's not a co-location. It will be two schools that are just next to each other. Separate parking lots.
Exactly.
Additional impervious, mature trees will go. So, and Saybrook Oaks is, you know, it's a dead-end street. So putting another school back there, unless by some miracle, the road can be cut through to mid-county, which was gonna take down acres of trees as well. I think, you know, it's just a different constituency than that you're gonna be dealing with. But I can certainly, I mean, it wasn't one of the 14 that the committee looked at. I can certainly ask that it could be evaluated.
And when we remove trees, they have to put trees back at 1.5 times the amount of trees that are removed.
That is the rule of thumb.
Okay.
But
All right.
as we know from, you know, the Watkins Mill interchange, we were talking to Robbins today.
Yes.
You know, when you take out a 2-foot wide tree and you replace it with 2 4-inch wide trees, you know, it's a tough call.
It takes a while,
Yeah.
definitely. Okay, so I know another concern is about the preserving the best elements used by residents. And so it would be good to know how much space is going to be needed to accommodate this new school, and how much is going to be dedicated park space that will be exclusively for the residents, with you know, around the clock access. What will have around the clock access and what won't? Let's see. I think one thing that would have been helpful to include in the slide would have been a chart or, you know, a slide that talked about the role and responsibility of the city council, and I guess our extent of power in this process, and then what the role of MCPS and the Board of Education, what role they play as well. Because I know that there are some, you know, people have said, well, why can't we do this with our land? And it's our land, why can't we, you know, make these changes or do this? So I think it would be helpful to, you know, clearly outline what our roles are between both parties and how we can navigate those roles.
Yeah.
Let's
I
see.
think earlier someone mentioned even, the potential for eminent domain. I can tell you that's never,
Yeah,
never been mentioned.
Yes, so,
That is
you
not a
know,
business at MCPS. Usually it's
definitely clearing up some of the, some of the, I guess I wouldn't say mistruths, but the.
Misperceptions?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, misperceptions, misunderstandings about what our role and responsibilities are. I think that would be helpful. Definitely, I don't know if you mentioned the potential for having an actual committee from, made up of residents as well as, the city and the Board of Ed once the feasibility study starts. I don't know how.
I mentioned
much.
having the consultants themselves meet with
Yes.
anyone,
Okay.
not just a committee. I think that there would be so much interest anyway.
It would.
That they would probably need to have just one or two community meetings
Definitely.
to get all the input that they can get.
Because I saw that, I know the final plan will come back before the mayor and council.
Oh, yeah.
But making sure that we are, well informed throughout the process and the communities that will be affected as well remain included in the conversation. I know our mayor mentioned the residential home price impact. Was there any additional research done to decide or to, I guess,
there is no-
communicate what the impact would be if the residents can't go, if the residents' children can't go to the school versus if they can go to the school, what the financial impacts would be?
A lot of that is really emotionally based. There is no hard data about that.
Okay.
Even the Forest Oak Middle School model, you don't know what didn't happen. So there was, we really remain silent on the property issue. We know that if they do get boundaried in, that will have a positive effect, or,
Definitely.
well, actually, I shouldn't so even know that, but we strongly suspect that that's the case.
I would agree.
We do not know
What
the reverse.
Okay.
And I've looked for studies on this subject, and you just
Nothing.
cannot find them.
Okay, thank you. What else? I think we talked about the buffer between the school and the community, about providing buffers should the school site be finally selected. Let's see. I know that we pride ourselves on having parks within 1.5 miles of every resident. Should we lose, I
Quarter
guess,
mile.
It's a quarter mile.
It's a quarter,
Yeah, it's a quarter mile from every
Yeah.
resident.
oh, quarter mile?
Yeah.
And we're
Oh,
pretty
okay.
good at it too.
Yeah.
Oh, I know. I love our parks and have one right across the street, so, I guess, we won't know until further designs are made about what that park will look like and if a playground will be built. I don't see any room for a playground. I see that the two baseball fields and then a turf park. Would it be the playground that's at the elementary school, or would an additional playground?
It would be both.
Okay, okay. Let's see. I think that's it, and I think, the last question would just be what is the alternative if we don't approve to move forward with you going into negotiation with the school? What worst case scenario?
I mean, my gut feeling is that MCPS will simply go to a different cluster where it's just easier to get, well, I mean, everyone wants this school. It's the only fast-track school in the pipeline. I mean, I think they're just gonna follow the path of least resistance. It's not hard to find a cluster that has overcrowding, and we'll probably use one of their own sites. Probably not in Gaithersburg.
In Washington Grove, I know it's one of our temporary schools. Have we explored additions at Washington Grove, or has that?
I do not know. I know the addition at Gaithersburg Elementary School was taken off the
Yes,
table because
it
it made it
was.
too big. But I don't know about Washington Grove, and the access to Washington Grove is pretty limited as well.
Limited access.
One of the compelling things about this site is
Walkability.
Victory Farm, is the road is already scaled to take a school.
All right.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, Lorianne. Mike?
Okay, it was nice to see your list. It looked a lot like mine. But there were a couple things that there are a few things that I have that weren't on your list. One of it is, it's great to have shared facilities in the city. It's also great to be able to share the cost of maintaining those facilities, which we haven't been able to do with our other shared facility. And basically, the city bears all the cost of maintenance of the field at Lakelands Park Middle School. So I would like to have that discussion where the operating costs of maintaining those shared facilities is something that we discuss and put on the table. I mean, that's an annual budget item for us. And the amount of use that the school gets out of that field is probably significant. So the idea that everything that's going to be lost, the lost elements are going to be replaced or relocated is pretty important. We talked about the playground. I don't really see a site for a playground here yet. Perhaps that's something we need to look at. And I like the idea that Neil mentioned about turning this footprint 90 degrees. If we look at Brown Station, which just opened this year, that school building has a similar elongated configuration, but it is perpendicular to Quince Orchard Boulevard. It's probably actually a smaller footprint than they have here, so that may actually increase the available space, and it certainly would require some reconfiguration of the parking lots that they have here. I know this is just a schematic, but I think it would be, or even if they move the whole building another 30 to 50 feet south, parallel to.
Well, that's just sort of a.
Anyway, but that's, so I think.
They haven't done a feasibility
No,
yet.
I know, but I think that's, so if this is where the footprint's gonna be, I'd like to see some other configurations and some things to talk about. So we've already talked about assurances for the enrollment being largely walkers from the adjacent neighborhoods. I think that's very important. I think that, and this is a site that's more walkable to more communities than the Forest Oak adjacent site, and I think we have to keep that in mind. We've already talked about the access by roads. We talked about stormwater management in terms of the parking lot, but I think this building and the entire site needs to be a state-of-the-art stormwater management and environmental plan. The green space is pretty important to us. We want to maintain it, and I think there's some opportunities and advantages there. So we've talked about maximizing park access both during the construction and afterwards and during school hours. I think, so my question was, is the path along the baseball fields, Kelly 1 and Kelly 2, or is that path going to be open? Or, I guess I would insist that that path be accessible during all hours.
Yeah, you can't say the park's open if you can't get up that
Yeah.
path at the base of that hill.
That's right. So, that really we have to insist on that. And then finally, related to traffic and safety, if this is really a walking school, then we have to be confident that there's going to be crossing guards at Saybrook Oaks and Victory Farm, and at Girard and Victory Farm, and also crossing guards right in front of the school. I think if again, we're just looking at a kind of a schematic design. If they move the bus parking lot a little bit south on Victory Farm, it wouldn't, the exit or entrance to it wouldn't be immediately, it wouldn't create an intersection with Belgrove Road. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that may be an issue that we want to talk about. It depends on which way the buses enter that lot. So do they enter from the south or do they enter from the north?
You're getting too specific.
No, but it is, buses go in one way and they come out one way.
That's true.
So that's part, if we're going to talk about traffic issues, I think we have to talk about this. So anyway, that's pretty much everything I had. I think everything else is covered. The most important thing to me, though, is that this boundary study include the consideration of the boundaries for Forest Oak Middle School as well. And then if a high priority for the site selection committee panel was a walkable school, then that has to enter into that boundary discussion as well. So, I think we've talked about that ad nauseum. So, Anyway, that's it.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And I'll start with a point that you made, which is it is the county's responsibility and MCPS working through the state agency, BOE, to provide for the education of children. It's not our responsibility. And it's quite extraordinary for the municipality to step up and to do something that's not our responsibility for our children, to help MCPS meet its obligations. And so I, like you, share the opinion that you know, it's extraordinary. I'm willing to consider it, but I don't want to make this a model for going forward. But it does open up an opportunity, as Neil and Mike talk about, with reevaluating our relationship with MCPS. You know, we've stepped to the plate with something, and perhaps there are other issues around the city that we could deal with MCPS that, you know, perhaps aren't exactly sitting comfortably with us. Neil mentioned a road. Mike mentioned the shared use agreement in Lakelands Park. So I'm fully in favor of looking at that relationship and seeing where else we can work with the MCPS to fine-tune our relationship. And I think we'd also talked about future endeavors within the city, identifying sites that we could use in other clusters to help MCPS fulfill its obligations. And so, you know, it certainly is an integral relationship, and I don't want to sound like we're trying to take, but we're also trying to give, and we're giving here, and I think the relationship is important to continue that conversation in other areas of the city. So we talked about a lot about the various points. You know, I made my point about the boundaries. I think, as Mike's just said, that is a key to me. You know, we need a school. We need a school in Gaithersburg cluster, but it needs to be a walkable school. It needs to be a neighborhood school. And I would insist during negotiations that, as the slide said, that we talk about Forest Oak Middle School as well, reopening and revisiting those boundaries. You know, again, it's extraordinary that we're being asked to step up here, and I think it's been intimated that it's without compensation. You know, I don't know. I mean, I think it should be part of the conversation, compensation for the property, or a land swap, some kind of value being received for what we're doing here. Public engagement is key. I like the idea of having repeated meetings that we publicize, that MCPS publicizes, that everybody and their mother knows it's going on, to talk about what's going to be built where. I think we also need to think about other ways the public can be involved with input in the process. Fee sharing we talked about. You know, I share the concerns about the site layout that Ryan expressed and that Mike expressed, but I realize that's something that will come down the pipe. The key there is I would like options, and I would like us to be presented with those options so that we can weigh them before any other vote occurs. The final point, I guess, has been mentioned a few times by individuals who testified. Judd mentioned it and Lorianne mentioned it as well, is, you know, we did not, as a city, have input into what sites were selected for the site evaluation that was conducted. One site that was not considered was the property we own, Victory Farm Park, which is adjacent to Forest Oak Middle School. I've been looking at it. I've been talking to various individuals about it, including Board of Education members. I don't know if it's a feasible site, and that's not where I'm going with this. You know, if it's not a feasible site, that's fine. But I would like to have an analysis done of whether it's feasible. So it was suggested to me that MCPS could not enter into a new site selection process, but do a site comparison between Kelly Park and the property adjacent to Forest Oak Middle School, the Victory Farm Park site. So I would ask that we explore that possibility, have that site evaluated, see if it's a better site. It may very well be a better site, once all factors are considered, than Kelly Park is. It may not be, but the point of the matter is it hasn't been evaluated. I argue it should have been evaluated, but we're well beyond that now. So that's my ask, is that we push, we request, and that MCPS engage in a site comparison between the two. And whatever comes out in the end,
I think I can do that. I mean, I think Lorianne asked for the same thing, and the mayor had mentioned the same thing.
He doesn't have a vote, though.
But his point that
Thanks for clarifying what I say.
No, I said I agree.
That they can
I
be done
specifically said I agree with that
Agreed.
point as
You
well.
also, you said you agreed with him saying that my comments were,
Guys, you're usually ridiculous.
I'm sorry,
but,
let's,
you know,
yeah.
not tonight.
And that's what I wanted to reinforce. I mean, your first point, you know, we're not stepping up to the plate. We're stepping up to the plate again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that
We did
because I.
We made
Many
Lakeland
times.
Park happen. That
Because.
middle school could not exist in that new urbanist neighborhood without shared use of our park. And it's great, but I don't think you can disconnect that we were a good partner then. And now this school, which no one saw coming, is aimed at the Gaithersburg cluster.
we're partners. Go
In
to-
many ways, not just
Yeah.
facilities,
Yeah.
but in programs too. Just in case anyone's wondering, Capitals are up 5-2.
With,
Like about 5 minutes
4
left
minutes
in
to
the
go,
game.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think, you know.
I'm sorry, yeah, go on, Mike.
You know, Tony brought up, this isn't the first time, and I was gonna bring up that point. Basically, MCPS did not want the Lakelands Park middle school site until basically a coalition of parents, PTAs, and the city forced them to take the site when they realized they didn't have the capacity at Kingsview and Richmond. So this isn't the first time that we've stepped up to the plate for the benefit of our children who live in Gaithersburg. So I don't expect that to, I agree, the county MCPS has the responsibility for providing schools and adequate schools. But, you know, if we have an opportunity to improve the situation for our kids, then we shouldn't shirk from it. So.
All right, so do you want a resolution, or are you okay with the guidance that you just received? Is it enough?
If it constitutes authority to negotiate, I'm okay.
And I think we'd be better with a motion authorizing Tony, or granting Tony the authority to negotiate.
Who wants to make that motion?
I'll make the motion that the negotiating points that we've enumerated by Tony and the rest, and the council, be the points that, to enter into negotiation with MCPS for this site.
Like including but not limited to?
Not limited to, but certainly must include those things that we've asked for.
Here's something that I would like to consider adding to that is if we're going to look at Victory Farm Park, I would like MCPS to have the authority to do exactly what they're doing here with respect to feasibility, environmental, transportation. So I would move that we authorize you, Tony, to enter into those sorts of negotiations for that site as well, and then with respect to the site comparison. Because I don't want to come back to this. I want this process to move forward. And I think that's the most expeditious way to have the process move forward and consider all the sites that are within this community-based school.
So we have to second the motion before you can amend it, but I don't have a problem.
Lorianne seconded it.
Okay, we have
As
a
Robert's
motion and a
rules say.
second.
Okay, so it's been seconded.
So
And you'd
move
like
to
to
amend
propose-
as I just said. Is that kosher?
Did you get that?
Do I have to accept that as the author of
You
it?
would have to accept the, as the author
I
of the
would
motion.
accept that as the author of the motion.
Okay, so do we have to go through a second to the amendment?
It's a friendly amendment that's been accepted.
Friendly amendment's been accepted, so we can just do the
Yeah,
whole
you can
thing.
just do the whole thing,
Okay,
yes.
all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Say nay. Okay, it carries unanimously. It's late. Okay, thank you all very much. Next, we have from the city attorney.
All other sites.
I just have one very quick update this evening on the Federal Communications commission proceedings dealing with the small cell facilities. Last week, the Smart Communities Coalition, which Gaithersburg is a part of, submitted an additional filing with the FCC in light of the recent U.S. Supreme Court Murphy case, which was the sports gambling case, which you wouldn't think would have anything to deal with small cell facilities. But in the Murphy case, the U.S. Supreme Court held that, or it limited federal authority to mandate state and local authorities to take action absent a constitutional delegation of authority. So our council in this case thought that that may be applicable to the small cell issue as well. As a result of that filing, the FCC reached out to the coalition today. They've requested a meeting with us, which is the first time they've requested that.
Oh.
Apparently, they do now want to get a better understanding of local permitting processes, the costs that localities incur with permitting, and citing issues in the public rights of way. So we are working on a meeting in July, and we will have a Gaithersburg representative at that meeting.
I am so
That's
happy to hear
fantastic.
that. That's
All right.
outstanding.
Okay.
Lynn, thank you so much for your leadership on that, and the council for supporting our team and our outside counsel. Anything from any other staff? Not seeing anything. Okay, as I mentioned, no work session next week because of the convention. The next regular meeting we will hold is on Monday, June 18th. Until then, let's do great things, Gaithersburg. We are adjourned.